They rise from the earth as if they were never built, but grown. Stone upon stone, layered in patience, each block holding centuries in its core. To walk toward an ancient fortress is to feel its gaze before you cross the threshold. The air thickens, not with threat, but with the slow, unyielding presence of something that has outlived kings, storms, and the delicate ambitions of those who once called it home. The walls seem to breathe in silence. From a distance, they are austere silhouettes etched against a gray horizon. Up close, they reveal their texture, pitted from rain, brushed by centuries of hands both loving and desperate. The stone is not cold, not exactly. Press your palm against it and you will feel a faint warmth, the echo of sun and seasons. It holds heat and memory alike. Somewhere in those layers are fingerprints pressed by builders whose names have been erased by time, yet whose work endures in every seam. Daylight casts kindness upon these walls. In the morning, shadows hide within the crevices, waiting for the sun to climb higher. By noon, the battlements are bright, almost soft, their edges blunted by haze. But as the hours pass, the tone changes. Afternoon light slants low, painting the ramparts gold and deepening the blackness of narrow arrow slits. The contrast sharpens, warmth against chill, illumination against the secret dark. The castle transforms without moving, shifting from a place of defense to a keeper of mysteries. Inside the gateway, the air changes again. Sound becomes softer, the world outside replaced by a slower rhythm. The flagstones underfoot are uneven, worn smooth in the center and sharp at the edges, shaped by the passage of feet in both joy and fear. Some stones are darker than others, not by design, but by the accidents of history. Stains that no rain has ever washed away. As you move deeper, the walls draw closer. Their weight is not only vertical but horizontal, pressing in from all sides, a silent reminder of how they were meant to protect and to contain. These fortresses were born from necessity, their dimensions dictated by both landscape and survival. Yet in their endurance, they became something more than military tools. They became repositories of time, each room holding an era suspended in stillness. The warmth of torchlight touches one side of the corridor, leaving the other in shadow. The flames sway with the faintest draft, sending waves of light across the stone like water rippling over a riverbed. In the flicker, carvings emerge, symbols, initials, strange marks whose meaning is lost but whose presence insists they were once important. Perhaps a soldier's idle scratch during a long watch. Perhaps a mason's hidden signature left not for glory but for connection. Listen long enough, and the building itself seems to have a voice, a low hum that is neither wind nor imagination. It comes from the way air moves through narrow halls, from the way footsteps resonate in long chambers. Sometimes the hum deepens unexpectedly, as if in response to your own breathing. The walls remember everything, yet they speak in a language too old for words. There is a weight to knowing how many lives have touched this place, how many conversations once filled these same halls, urgent orders shouted in battle, murmured confessions by candlelight, lullabies sung to children who would never live to see peace. Every fortress is both cradle and tomb, the stone holding joy as tightly as it holds grief. The two are inseparable here. To feel one is to brush against the other. Step into the great hall and look upward. The ceiling soars not for decoration but for necessity, to release the smoke from fires that once burned here without pause. The rafters are heavy beams, each scarred by age and by the long dead insects that once chewed their edges. In the dimness, they resemble the ribs of some vast creature, the hall itself a giant chest cavity, its heart long silent. The walls are lined with tapestries faded to the color of dried flowers. What scenes they once displayed is unclear now. Perhaps battles, perhaps hunts, perhaps imagined paradises. Their threads are frayed, but they still soften the echo of your steps. You realize that here even time erodes gently, leaving behind not emptiness but a muted version of what once was. You can almost picture the moments when the hall was alive, the press of bodies during a winter feast, the air thick with the scent of roasting meat and spiced wine, laughter rising above the clatter of wooden cups. And yet these same stones have also held silence so deep that it could swallow thought. Nights when the fire burned low, when the sentries outside heard nothing but the slow creak of timbers, when even the stars above seemed reluctant to watch. Not every memory here is grand. Some are humble. The sound of rain ticking against a narrow window, a servant humming to themselves as they swept ash from the hearth, a dog sleeping beside a door. These small moments are woven into the mortar just as much as the battles and coronations. In truth, it is these quiet remnants that make the walls feel alive. The fortress breathes differently at night. The torchlight is deeper, the shadows thicker, and the air cooler. You might feel without cause that someone is walking just out of sight, their presence more sensed than seen. It is not fear exactly, but an awareness that this place has been awake far longer than you. The walls have watched centuries pass, and in their watching they have learned patience. They do not need to reveal their secrets quickly. There is a comfort in this patience. The castle does not demand your belief in its mysteries, it simply allows you to stand within them. Whether you accept its stories or not, it will keep them as it has always done. The weight of the walls is not just their mass, it is the accumulation of everything they have seen, everything they have sheltered, and everything they have outlasted. When you finally step back into the open air, the change feels sudden. The sky above is wide again, the wind unbroken by stone. But part of you remains inside, in the hush of those corridors, in the warmth of torchlight on cold surfaces, in the presence of something vast and silent that needs no voice to be heard. The castle is still there, watching, waiting, and holding the memory of your passing among the thousands that came before. Day drains slowly from the sky, the light stretching thin over the ramparts as if reluctant to leave. In the final hour before darkness, the stones seem to change hue, the pale grays of daylight deepening into blues and muted charcoals, every shadow stretching longer, every corner holding its own private dusk. The air grows cooler, carrying with it a hush that is not the absence of sound, but the gathering of it. The last rays glance off weathered battlements, catching the edges of ancient crenellations before sliding away entirely. The warmth that clung to the courtyard stones ebbs, replaced by a faint dampness rising from the earth. The torches along the outer walls sputter to life, their flames fragile against the expanding dark. Each flicker casts brief golden ghosts along the stone, there for an instant, then gone, as if the night is already claiming its territory. Inside, the rooms alter in ways that feel subtle yet profound. Windows that once opened to bright vistas now frame only the indigo of the coming night. The air in the great hall thickens, scented faintly of wax and smoke. The echoes change too. Footsteps that once rang clear now seem muffled, absorbed into the growing quiet. Every sound, the scrape of a chair, the sigh of a closing door feels amplified, not louder but more deliberate, as though the castle itself is listening. Night has a way of folding the centuries together here. The present moment sits alongside the past without seam or boundary. The modern lantern in a guide's hand could just as easily be the rushlight of a chamberlain moving through these halls 500 years ago. The soft tread of your shoes on stone falls into rhythm with the imagined steps of those long gone. Time here is not a straight road. It spirals, looping back on itself, carrying you with it. Beyond the inner wards, the outer defenses vanish into blackness. The forest, once visible in green detail, now becomes a wall of shifting shadow. Somewhere in the branches, an owl calls, a low, resonant sound that seems to echo from the stones themselves. The wind rises in gentle swells, tugging at banners overhead. In the wavering light, the fabric seems older than it is, its colors fading in and out like memory. There is a moment just after full dark, when the castle feels as though it has withdrawn from the world. The distant road disappears into nothingness, the horizon erased. The only reality is within the walls, the torchlit corridors, the echo of your own breath, the sense of being enclosed not just in space but in time. Here the centuries are not past. They are suspended, ready to step forward at the smallest invitation. In the keep, the air grows cooler still. Stone, which seemed inert by day, feels awake now. The walls hold the day's fading heat in their core, releasing it in slow pulses that are almost imperceptible. The scent of the place changes too. The dryness of old timber mingling with the faint mineral damp of stone. The deeper you walk, the more the outside world slips away, until the night beyond these walls feels like an ocean you have already crossed. Candles gutter along narrow passageways, their light pooling unevenly across the floor. In places, the shadows seem thicker than they should be, refusing to yield to flame. The silence is textured, it has depth, a layering of countless nights exactly like this one, each leaving its residue in the air. If you pause, you might catch it. The faintest echo of unseen movement, a door that shifts on its hinges with no hand to guide it. The castle does not sleep. Even when no living soul stirs, it remains alert. Beams groan softly in the roof above. Somewhere in the distance, a chain rattles against its iron ring. These are not the loud, startling sounds of day. They are the measured breaths of an old presence, unhurried, aware of its own permanence. In this stillness, you feel the truth. Night here is not emptiness, but occupation. The dark fills the rooms as surely as the people once did. There are stories of how nights like this were spent centuries ago, guards pacing the walls with lanterns swinging from their hands, their eyes adjusting to the moonlight. Servants stoking low fires in great hearths, their faces lit in amber against the surrounding dark. Lords and ladies retiring to chambers where heavy curtains blocked the cold but not the faint, persistent draft of stone. In those hours, the castle's defenses were not only against invaders but against the encroaching night itself. Standing in the courtyard now, the stars appear through the black lattice of towers and turrets. They feel closer here, as if the height of the walls has lifted you nearer to them. The moon spills its light over the roofs and battlements, rendering them silver-edged, and in that pale glow, the centuries slip again. The same moonlight once fell on soldiers mustering for a midnight watch, on prisoners staring out through barred slits, on children too young to understand why the night air made their parents' voices hushed. Beyond sight, in the recesses of the walls, there are places where the darkness is so complete it feels tangible, as though you could reach out and take hold of it. Some claim these pockets of shadow are where the past lingers most strongly, where the weight of what has happened here settles and does not move. In such spaces, the mind plays tricks, weaving sound and memory together until it becomes difficult to tell which is imagined and which is drawn from something real. Time stretches differently now. Minutes feel longer, yet they pass without your noticing. You may stand in one place watching the flame of a torch bend and right itself again, and when you move, you find an hour has gone. The night inside the castle does not rush. It has learned the art of waiting, and it draws you into that same still rhythm. Sometimes the wind carries scents from the past, the faint tang of wood smoke, the suggestion of roasted meat. the sweetness of dried herbs once stored in the kitchen vaults. They arrive without warning, linger for only a moment, then vanish, leaving you uncertain whether they were real or conjured by the mind's readiness to believe. In the deepest hours, the outer world all but ceases to exist. The black sky above the towers becomes infinite, and the castle itself feels like an island adrift in it. Every sound within is magnified: the creak of a timber, the flick of an insect's wing near the candle flame, the low rush of wind through a narrow slit. These are not interruptions, but the heartbeat of the place, slow and steady. Eventually, the sense of separation from time itself grows complete. You are no longer walking in a structure built hundreds of years ago. You are walking in all its years at once. Every stone, every corridor, every flickering shadow is layered with what came before and what will come after. Night has pulled the threads of history taut, weaving them into something you can almost feel against your skin. And when at last you step out into the open air, perhaps onto the wall walk under the stars, you find that the night beyond the castle feels different too, as though you have carried a piece of the place with you. The stillness follows, the elasticity of time stretching out into the dark fields beyond. The world outside will return in the morning, but for now you remain suspended in the castle's night, where past and present breathe the same quiet air. It begins quietly. A single sound in the stillness, the faintest press of weight against stone, the soft scuff of movement that seems both near and far. You pause, certain it was only the wind shifting along the corridor, but the air is still. These are not the footsteps of an intruder. They carry no urgency, no purpose you can sense. They feel unbound, slow, deliberate, as though whoever makes them has no need to hurry, no place they must reach. They move in a rhythm older than your presence here, perhaps older than the century itself. Long before these walls became a sight for curious visitors, they were the backdrop for countless whispered accounts. A maid carrying linens to an upper room feels someone pass behind her, though the hall is empty. A watchman on the night shift hears boots on the stair ahead, yet sees nothing when he rounds the bend. A child wandering from their bed in a sleepless hour speaks of a shadow friend who walks with them and then disappears at the courtyard gate. None of these tales are told with terror. They are offered in low, almost affectionate tones, as though the castle has a way of holding on to certain presences without malice. The people who live and work here speak of these moments like one might speak of the weather, part of the landscape, expected but never quite predictable. The earliest recorded story comes from a winter more than 400 years past. A cook, working late, claimed to have heard footsteps in the small passage behind the great kitchen, a passage used for servants to move unseen. When she went to look, she saw nothing, but the scent of damp wool lingered in the air, as though someone had walked in from the snow. It was a detail so small it might have been dismissed, and yet it stayed with her for the rest of her life. Since then, variations of the same encounter have repeated across centuries. A presence unseen but somehow felt in the shift of weight in a wooden floorboard, in the creak of a door easing open without a draft, in the faint reverberation of steps that fade into nothing. The castle, it seems, has its own way of reminding those within its walls that it is never entirely empty. Walking here at night, you might notice how the acoustics play tricks. A step in one part of the corridor seems to echo from another. A sound on the upper floor can drift down the stairwell with no clear origin. This is part of the castle's design. The same design meant to carry the clang of alarms and the calls of watchmen also carries subtler sounds, ones that feel out of place in the present moment. If you follow the sound, it always seems to remain just ahead. The passage turns, the stair climbs, the door opens into a room you have not yet seen, but the steps are always elsewhere, always just beyond reach. And when you stop, they stop too, as though they have been waiting for you to listen. Some say the footsteps belong to the first lord of the castle, still pacing his domain. Others believe they are the trace of a soldier who never left his post. A few suggest they are not one person at all, but the memory of every step ever taken here, layered together until the past walks beside the present. Whether you believe the stories or not, the sensation is undeniable. It is not fear that comes, but a quiet curiosity, the way you might feel in a room where someone has just left, a warmth still in the air, a faint displacement, the sense that life has brushed past and moved on. These first footsteps are the opening notes of the castle's deeper song. They prepare you gently for the fact that here history does not stay pressed between the pages of a book. It moves softly through the corridors, choosing when to be heard. And as you listen, you begin to understand. In places like this, the past is not a thing gone, it is a presence patient and enduring, waiting for you to walk beside it. The great hall is alive with warmth. Light spills from torches set in iron brackets along the walls, their flames leaning and swaying in unseen currents. Shadows ripple over the carved beams above, pooling in the high rafters like drifting smoke. The long tables set end to end, groan beneath the weight of silver platters and earthenware bowls. Steam rises from roasted meats glistening in their own juices. Loaves of bread, baked dark at the crust and soft within, release the scent of grain and fire. Earthen jugs of spiced wine stand ready, their contents glowing deep red in the flicker of the flames. The sound is a tide. Voices rise and fall in waves, bursts of laughter cresting over murmured conversations. The soft clink of knives against plates, the shuffle of feet on flagstone. Somewhere a lute picks out a slow, deliberate tune, the notes wandering above the noise like a bird tracing the air. The fire in the hearth roars, and for a moment it feels as though the stone itself is warming, as though the walls are leaning in to bask in the joy. Such nights were not merely meals, they were theater. The hall was a stage for display of wealth, of hospitality, of power. The lord of the castle sat at the high table beneath a canopy, the light falling fully upon him while the corners of the room dissolved into dimness. Courtiers, soldiers, servants, and guests each had their place, and the order of seating told its own story about favor and rank. Food arrived in processions, venison with glistening herbs, fresh trout laid out on beds of green, pastries filled with spiced fruits whose sweetness masked the long winter. Servants moved in coordinated patterns, replacing trenchers, pouring wine, clearing bones into wooden tubs. The air was thick with the mingling scents of meat, bread, candle wax, and the faint perfume worn by those who could afford it. And yet, even on the most joyous evenings, the walls remembered what lay beyond them. The same high windows that allowed moonlight to silver the table also framed the silhouettes of the watchmen on the ramparts. The same gates that opened to receive honored guests could be barred in moments against enemies. Because for every feast there was a siege, the transformation could be swift. The hall that rang with music could fall silent overnight. The scent of roasting meat would give way to the acrid tang of smoke from the outer walls, the air tight with the scent of tar heated for defense. Torches still burned, but now their light was wary, sharp. In siege, the castle became a different kind of body. Its gates were clenched jaws, its walls a ribcage, its towers eyes that never closed. Every man, woman, and child within became a vital part of its survival. Water had to be rationed. Food was counted, locked away, guarded. Fires were kept small to conserve fuel and avoid signaling weakness to the enemy. The sounds were different too. The laughter of the feast was replaced by the deep thud of stones striking the outer walls, the distant crash of a siege engine at work. Voices, dropped to low, tight exchanges. The shrill call of a horn meant more than ceremony. It was the alarm that drew men to the battlements. In those hours, the great hall became a place not of celebration but of council. Maps were unrolled across the same tables where loaves once sat steaming. Men bent over them, tracing lines with calloused fingers, calculating how many days of supplies remained. Servants moved with equal care, carrying messages, tending fires, trying not to meet the eyes of those who had little comfort to offer. Still, even in siege, there were moments of strange beauty. The night air above the ramparts could be utterly still, the stars sharp enough to seem close. A lull between assaults might stretch long enough for someone to hear the slow rhythm of the wind moving through the nearby woods. In such moments, the castle seemed to hold its breath, as if suspended between danger and peace. Those who lived through both feasts and sieges spoke of them as two sides of the same coin. One could not fully savor the abundance of the hall without knowing the hunger that came with a blockade. Likewise, the grim work of defense was fueled by memories of better nights, when the castle's heart beat in laughter and music rather than in the measured tread of guards on cold stone. Over years, the rhythm of feast and siege became the rhythm of life here. Celebrations were held with a kind of fierce gratitude, as though each could be the last. Defenses were maintained even in times of plenty because peace was never assumed to be permanent. The same stone that absorbed the sound of dancing feet also drank in the cries of battle. And when the wars passed and the years stretched quieter, the castle still remembered. The scorch marks near the gates, the chips in the battlements, the faint marks on the hall's tables where daggers had once been driven in for emphasis. These were the scars of its long life. To walk here now is to feel both histories at once. You can stand in the hall and hear in the mind's ear the rise of a toast, the clink of a cup against another. In the same space, you can almost sense the weight of an arrow quiver against a soldier's back, the way their breath might have come in quick clouds on a winter morning as they climbed to their post. Perhaps that is the castle's most enduring truth, that joy and danger are never entirely separate. The feast feeds the defenders, the siege tests the bonds forged in celebration. One makes the other more vivid. Even centuries later, the air seems to carry traces of both. You might visit on a summer afternoon, sunlight warming the stones, and yet feel a faint tension, as if the walls are always listening for the sound of approaching footsteps. Or you might come in winter with frost painting the edges of the windows and sense an echo of laughter, as if the hall still remembers the warmth of 100 fires and the voices that gathered around them. The castle lives in these contrasts. It is never only a place of comfort or only a bastion of defense. It is both, always a vessel for abundance and for hardship, for music and for silence, for life and for the threat of its loss. To understand it, you must be willing to hold both in your mind at once. The way the stones themselves hold centuries of light and shadow, joy and sorrow, without ever letting one erase the other. The stones stand with a kind of certainty, as though they have always been here. Yet every wall has a beginning, and in those beginnings there are stories few dare to tell in daylight. Across centuries, in lands separated by mountains and seas, a pattern emerges in old accounts. The belief that walls require more than stone and skill to endure. They require an offering, not gold, not prayer, something living. The chronicles are careful, their ink faded, but their words deliberate. In some, the act is framed as necessity, the belief that a human life, sealed within the foundation, would bind the structure against collapse. In others, it is told as a warning, a whispered curse against the greed of lords who valued permanence above mercy. These accounts are never lengthy. They appear as a few sentences in the margins of larger histories, as if those who wrote them were both compelled to record and reluctant to linger. Legends name the chosen in many ways. A servant who stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. A prisoner offered reprieve in exchange for becoming part of the wall. A volunteer promised eternal honor. Some tales speak of children, others of strangers with no kin to mourn them. In each version, the figure vanishes into the stone, their presence unmarked save for the strength the walls would supposedly gain. One of the most enduring of these stories comes from a fortress whose foundations sink deep into the bedrock of a river valley. The tale says that the first attempt to raise its walls failed. Each morning, the masons found the previous day's work collapsed into rubble. Night after night, the wind carried strange voices along the riverbank, low and unhurried like the recitation of a vow. On the seventh night, the Lord's advisor declared that the land itself demanded a life in exchange for stability. By dawn, a young woman from the village was gone. The next day, the walls held. They stand still. Was it truth or a story told to explain the improbable? The records give no certainty. Yet those who work in that castle today speak of one small, narrow chamber deep below the eastern tower where the air feels warmer than it should, and where tools left overnight are found in new positions by morning. In other places, the legend shifts shape. The entombed is not sacrificed but honored, a great warrior who chose to rest within the walls he defended, a queen who insisted her spirit should guard her home. In these tellings, the act becomes an act of devotion rather than cruelty. Still, the result is the same: a life and a wall, fused into one enduring presence. Archaeologists, when pressed, offer explanations. Unusual voids in old mortar might be the result of imperfect mixing. Discolored patches of stone may come from different quarry batches. The occasional discovery of human remains near foundations could be due to earlier burials on the site. The rational accounts are tidy, complete, and yet the legends persist. Perhaps it is because the idea feels plausible. In an age when superstition and survival were intertwined, what greater assurance could there be than binding human fate to the fate of the structure itself? If the castle fell, the life would be released. As long as it stood, so too would the spirit remain. Night changes how these stories are heard. In the quiet hours when the wind curls around the towers and the corridors seem to fold in on themselves, the thought of a life pressed into the stone feels less like a tale and more like a presence. A faint warmth against the wall where there should be none. A brief echo in the floor as though a second set of footsteps walks just beneath your own. There is a place in one northern keep where the inner wall bows slightly inward, an imperfection unnoticed by most visitors. Local guides tell it differently to each listener. To some, it is the mark left when the stones settled around the shape of a body. To others, it is where the wall still shifts, making room for the restlessness of what lies within. No one agrees on the truth and no one tries too hard to prove it. Some silences are better left intact. What is certain is that the belief left its mark far beyond any single castle. Folklore in distant regions carries variations of the same theme. Bridges that would not hold until a shadow was built into them. Towers that would not rise until a heartbeat was stilled in their core. The image is the same: walls that are not merely guarded by the living but kept by the dead. Standing within such walls, you might find yourself pressing a palm to the stone, half expecting to feel a pulse. The surface is cool, unyielding, but somewhere in the mind's quiet space there is the suggestion of something beneath, not moving, but waiting. Whether it waits in peace or in resentment, no story can quite agree. And so the truth remains suspended like the mortar itself between its stones. Part fact, part invention, impossible to separate cleanly. The walls endure, their silence neither confirming nor denying the tales told about them. They have no need to. They will stand as long as they choose, holding their secrets, their weight, and perhaps the faint echo of the lives given to keep them whole. The battlements rise like the spine of the castle, their jagged outline etched against the night sky. Up here the air is different, thinner, colder, touched by the wind that has swept across open fields and forests before meeting the stone. The world below spreads into darkness, the land's features dissolved into shadow. Only the faintest glimmers mark the distant lights of villages, small and far away, like embers scattered across a blackened hearth. By day, these walls are a vantage point, a place to watch the approach of friends or foes. But at night, they become a realm apart, suspended between earth and sky. The stones underfoot are worn smooth in the center, their edges crumbling where centuries of boots have passed. Every step is a reminder that these were not built for comfort. They were built for endurance, for standing firm when all below was chaos. The wind here has a voice. It moans through the gaps in the crenellations, whistles in the narrow spaces where the stones have shifted over time. Sometimes it seems to speak in fragments, carrying a phrase or a name you cannot quite catch. In moonlight, the battlements cast long shadows onto themselves, creating the illusion of movement, a figure slipping past the Merlin, another leaning over to scan the horizon. Look closely and there is nothing there, only the play of darkness and light. But the impression lingers, as though the stone remembers the shapes it once supported. It is said that on certain nights, long after the last visitor has left, the battlements are not empty. A figure in weathered armor may appear along the wall walk, head bowed, hand resting on the hilt of a sword that no longer exists. Sometimes there is more than 1-2 sentinels pacing in silent unison, their steps falling into a rhythm that the wind seems to carry across the towers. They never acknowledge the living, never turn their gaze inward. Their watch is for something else, something far beyond the reach of the present. The tragedies tied to these heights are many. In times of siege, this was the first place to see the enemy's approach, the last to fall before surrender. Archers stood here until their quivers emptied, then fought with whatever they could grasp. More than one soldier met their end not from an enemy's blade, but from the long drop beyond the parapet, whether by accident, misstep, or desperate choice when defeat was certain. The stones absorbed the impact, then held the silence that followed. There are softer stories too, though they are no less haunting. Lovers parted on the battlements, one bound for war, the other left behind. Messengers waited here in the dead of night for signals that never came. Children climbed the steps to watch for the return of fathers, uncles, brothers, the waiting stretching into years until the faces blurred in memory. These walls have witnessed reunions and farewells alike, both carried on the same unchanging wind. Moonlight is the great revealer. When it floods the battlements, the stone seems almost white, every crack and mark standing in sharp relief. The shadows deepen into pools so black they seem to open downward into the past. It is in this silvered half-world that the old sentinels are most often seen, not solid but as if projected onto the air like a fading frame of film caught in a beam of light. They move with purpose, yet without urgency, their faces indistinct, their forms dissolving into the night if watched for too long. Even in their absence, the feeling of being watched remains. The battlements were designed for vigilance, and that purpose seems to have imprinted itself into the very fabric of the place. You may lean over the parapet and sense eyes on your back, or walk the length of the wall and feel a presence keeping pace beside you. It is not threatening, not exactly. It is simply there, a constant reminder that you are never truly alone atop these walls. Sometimes the wind drops to nothing and the silence becomes absolute. In those moments, you can hear your own heartbeat, the creak of leather, the soft scrape of your boots against stone. Then from somewhere far down the wall comes the sound of another step, deliberate and measured, echoing once before the night swallows it. Whether those who walk here are echoes of the past or inventions of the mind, the battlements hold their shapes. The stone remembers the weight of armor, the shift of bodies leaning into the wind, the unblinking gaze fixed on the horizon. These memories do not fade quickly. They cling like frost, invisible until the light strikes them just so. And so the battlements remain what they have always been, both shield and stage. They protect the castle from the world beyond, and they display its history against the backdrop of the night. Every shadow cast here has a story, and every story has a shadow that lingers, long after the living have gone below to the warmth of the hall. Up here under the moon and in the wind, the watch goes on. She is not bound to one place. Her name changes with the language of the land, her story shifting with the stones that hold it. And yet, across Europe's castles, her presence is described with a sameness that defies coincidence. A woman who appears in the long, dim corridors when the hour is late and the air is still. The accounts begin in ways that seem almost ordinary. A lone traveler is given a guest chamber in an old keep. A steward, locking up after the day's visitors have gone, makes one last pass through the upper halls. A maid carrying linens takes the quieter route between the great hall and the east wing. They each hear it first, not a voice, not even footsteps, but the delicate susurration of fabric against stone, a skirt brushing the wall, the whisper of silk folding and unfolding in motion. The sound is always close, yet impossible to place. It does not come from ahead or behind, but seems to breathe along the corridor itself, as though the air has learned how to mimic movement. Those who hear it often pause, expecting to see a figure emerge from the dimness. And she does. She is described with the precision of memory, tall or slight depending on the teller, but always graceful in her bearing. The dress changes with the setting. In some places it is pale and flowing like mist caught in form. In others it is dark, its folds absorbing the light. Her face is often partly obscured by a veil, by the fall of her hair, or simply by the soft blur of perception when the mind tries to see what should not be there. What unites the accounts is the stillness she carries. Even as she moves, she seems untouched by the air around her. No draft disturbs her hem, no shadow of her falls on the wall. Her steps, if she takes them, make no sound. The only evidence of her passage is that low, silken rustle, as though the stone itself remembers the shape of her gown. In some castles, she is seen turning into a side passage that no longer exists, the doorway long since filled in by later builders. In others, she walks the full length of a hall before vanishing at its end, fading not into the shadows but into the very surface of the wall. On rare occasions, she is glimpsed crossing an open archway, the moonlight passing through her as though she is woven from the same silver threads. The stories seldom end in fear. More often, they leave witnesses unsettled, even wistful. There is a sense that she is not here to harm, but to repeat something, a root, a ritual, a moment that the walls will not let go. She carries no lantern, speaks no word, yet her presence is undeniable. Historians have tried to trace her origins. In one castle, she is said to be the widow of a lord who never returned from war, pacing the halls where she once waited for news. In another, she is a servant accused of betrayal, walking the corridor where she was last seen before her disappearance. In yet another, she is remembered as a daughter forced into marriage, her final hours spent in restless wandering before she was taken away. The details shift, but the essence remains. A woman moving through space as though searching for what she has lost, or perhaps for what was taken from her. The lady in the corridor appears in castles far from one another, across countries and centuries. Theories abound that she is a single spirit tied not to a place but to a kind of sorrow, that she is an archetype born from the collective memory of loss, that she is no ghost at all but a story shaped and reshaped until it feels like truth. Yet the similarity of the accounts, the precision with which that rustling fabric is described, gives the legend a strange cohesion. Those who have followed the sound speak of an odd distortion in distance. The corridor seems longer, the end farther away than it appeared when they began. The light ahead may dim or the shadows may shift as though rearranging themselves. And then, without transition, she is gone. The air as empty as if nothing had passed. There are subtler moments too. Visitors have reported catching the faint scent of lavender or rosewater in an otherwise cold, unused wing. Others have found themselves brushing against something soft in the air, a sensation gone the instant they turn. In one recorded account from the 19th century, a castle caretaker wrote of hearing the rustle each evening at the same time, even when the halls were lit and occupied. "She walks whether we see her or not," he wrote, "and the stones know her weight. It is not always night when she appears. Some claim to have glimpsed her in the muted light of dawn, her gown moving gently as though stirred by an unseen breeze. A pair of tourists in the 1970s swore they saw her during a guided tour, drifting ahead of the group, only to find that the corridor she entered was closed to the public and locked. The guide, when told, only nodded and said, "She prefers company now and then." In the oldest versions of her story, there is an unspoken agreement. No one tries to stop her. She has allowed her passage, and those who cross her path step aside without thinking. There is a quiet dignity to her presence, the way she holds her gaze ahead, the way her movement neither hastens nor lingers. Standing in such a corridor yourself, it is easy to imagine her there. The walls close in slightly, their surfaces cool and faintly uneven beneath the touch. The light falls in narrow bands from high, arched windows, the rest swallowed by shadow. You wait, not in fear, but in a kind of suspended attention. And then, perhaps, you hear it. The gentle sweep of fabric over stone, the past moving within reach but never quite touching. Whether she walks for longing or for duty, no one can say. Whether she is one woman or many bound by grief to these endless passages remains a mystery. But she is there, in the rustle and the stillness, in the way the air holds its breath when she passes. And if you should see her, you will understand why her story has traveled so far, carried not by ink and record alone, but by the corridors themselves, which seem to keep her as part of their very being. It often begins without warning. A visitor steps away from their tour group, drawn by the quiet of a side passage or the way the light spills through a high window. They linger, taking in the cool scent of stone, the echo of their own footsteps. And then, something shifts. It may be as small as a change in the air, a sudden stillness as though the entire castle has paused to listen. For some, it is the sensation of being observed, though no one else is in sight. Others speak of a faint sound, the whisper of cloth moving, the scrape of a boot sole far down the corridor, the murmur of voices too low to understand. These moments pass quickly, leaving behind a silence that feels heavier than before. The experiences mirror stories written centuries ago. In a 15th century account, a visiting noble described stopping in the upper hall to admire the view from a narrow window. He felt, he said, the brush of a presence passing behind him, though the floor made no sound beneath it. Today, a young traveler in the same hall tells of feeling something similar, a light pressure at her shoulder gone when she turned. There are visitors who feel temperature changes in ways no thermostat could explain. A father touring with his family entered a chamber just behind the Great Hall and was struck by a sudden drop in warmth. The guide explained that this wing was naturally cooler, but the man noticed something peculiar. The chills seemed to move with him, trailing him into the corridor and vanishing only when he stepped into the sunlit courtyard. Sometimes the feeling is not unsettling at all. In one castle, a woman wandering the gardens claimed she heard music drifting from an open window above. It was a tune she did not recognize, played on an instrument she could not name. She stood listening for several minutes before realizing that the window was boarded shut, and had been for decades. Still, she described the moment as peaceful, almost welcome, as if the past had decided to let me hear it for a little while. Castle staff, accustomed to both history and rumor, tend to recount these experiences without judgment. One caretaker tells of locking up late one night and hearing a door creak open down a side hall. Expecting to find a stray visitor, he walked the length of the corridor and found nothing, but the door, heavy and stiff in the frame, stood wide. He closed it, returned to his rounds, and 10 minutes later found it open again. The following morning, a colleague mentioned that same door had been noted for wandering open in journals dating back more than a century. There are even moments shared between strangers. Two tourists in different parts of a keep once reported the same detail within minutes of each other. A smell of wood smoke strong enough to sting the nose, though the fires had been cold all day. Neither had read of the legend that a certain guardhouse fills with the scent before storms, a belief recorded in the 18th century and passed quietly among the guides. What stands out in these modern accounts is the softness of their telling. Rarely do the witnesses speak with alarm. More often they seem contemplative, even hesitant, as though they do not want to disturb the experience by naming it too plainly. Some offer possible explanations: acoustics carrying sound from another room, a draft from an unseen gap, the mind playing with suggestion. But others are content to leave the cause unexamined, holding the moment like a found stone, turning it in memory from time to time. Perhaps this is why the parallels with older testimonies are so striking. A 17th century diary entry might speak of a voice behind me, low and without cause. A modern account might phrase it differently: I thought someone was about to speak, but no one was there. The language changes, but the core remains, the sense of the past brushing lightly against the present, as though testing the border between them. Even photographs have joined the pattern. In more than one castle, visitors have captured images only to find later a blur of shape in the background, not distinct enough to prove, but too precise to dismiss entirely. A shadow in the outline of a figure where no person stood. A faint pale smudge along a wall shaped like the curve of a gown. Whether trick of light or something else, they add another layer to the quiet accumulation of such moments. For those who come seeking these experiences, the uncertainty is part of the draw. There is no promise of an encounter, no certainty that the past will choose to reveal itself. The stories are not presented as proofs, but as possibilities, threads in the fabric of the place that you might or might not catch in your own time there. And so the visitors continue to walk the corridors, to stand in empty rooms, to pause at windows that frame both the present landscape and the memory of what it once was. They leave with photographs, with fragments of history, and sometimes with something more elusive. A fleeting moment when the centuries seemed to fold, when the air grew heavy with what had been, and the line between then and now thinned to almost nothing. The spiral staircase is a promise and a warning. From the first step, it invites you upward or downward into a path you cannot see in full. The curve hides what lies ahead, each turn revealing only enough to keep you moving. In castles, these stairs are narrow, the stone worn smooth in the center by the countless feet that have passed before. The walls close around you, close enough to brush a shoulder as you ascend, the air cooler, the light dimming with each rotation. In daylight, the spiral seems a clever piece of design, built to conserve space and slow attackers. In half-light, it becomes something else entirely, a journey without a clear beginning or end. You climb, and the sound of your own steps echoes in uneven intervals, bouncing from walls that seem to lean closer as the turns grow tighter. A small window may open unexpectedly, spilling a wedge of light across the curve, offering a glimpse of sky or courtyard before the path turns inward again, shutting you back into the stone. At night, these stairs become a different realm. A single torch or candle throws shadows that slide along the wall, changing shape as you move. The air feels thicker, as though the stone itself holds its breath. Each step upward is matched by a sense of leaving something behind, though you cannot name what. Each step downward carries a faint pressure, as if the castle is gently urging you deeper into its memory. Historians note that spiral stairs in many castles were designed to favor defenders, their tight clockwise turns allowing a right-handed swordsman descending to strike with more freedom. But the human mind reacts to these turns in ways beyond tactics. The repetition of curve after curve lulls the senses into a rhythm that can feel almost dreamlike. You lose track of how far you've come, of how much is left. It is easy to imagine you could walk in this circle forever, never reaching the place you seek. The endless hallways play their own trick. By day, they stretch in straight, sensible lines flanked by rows of doors or windows. By night, they become rivers of shadow. The far end seems farther than it should be, and the flicker of light from a torch or sconce marks not safety but the next bend into uncertainty. Your footsteps, sharp at first, grow quieter as if the air itself is absorbing them. These halls have their own acoustics. A cough or a word spoken at one end may arrive at the other, distorted, stretched thin. In older keeps, the floors tilt imperceptibly, leading the unwary toward unexpected descents or turns. And always there is the sense that the walls are watching, their long memories storing every step taken within them. Visitors sometimes speak of reaching the midpoint of a corridor and feeling as though they are no longer entirely in the present. It may be the dimness, the repetition of arches, the way the stone absorbs light, or it may be something less tangible. A fleeting thought passes. How many feet have walked this way? How many hurried in fear? How many drifted in weariness? How many never reached the door they sought? In some castles, the spiral stairs and endless halls are linked in such a way that one feeds into the other. A climb into darkness followed by a passage that seems to stretch without conclusion. Moving through them, you find yourself shifting between compression and release, between the tight embrace of the winding stair and the drawn-out exposure of the hall. The alternation works on the mind, heightening awareness, sharpening the sense of being guided by the architecture itself. Legends cling to these spaces. There are stories of those who entered the stairs and emerged in a different part of the castle entirely, as though the building had rearranged itself around them. Others tell of halls that seem longer on some nights than others, the end retreating no matter how many steps are taken. These tales are told without urgency, more as curiosities than warnings, but they leave a lingering question. How much of the castle's design is meant to control not only movement, but thought? The physical experience mirrors the mental one of drifting through history. Just as the spiral turns you round and round without showing the full path, so does the past reveal itself in fragments. Just as the endless hall tempts you to keep going despite its sameness, so does the pursuit of old stories draw you forward, deeper into shadow with no promise of conclusion. In the dark, both can become almost hypnotic. You place one foot after another, not thinking of the end, only of the next step. The castle leads you as it has led countless others, some real, some perhaps imagined, all now part of the same quiet procession. When you finally emerge into a room or a courtyard, the shift feels abrupt, as though you have been released from a spell. And yet part of you wishes to return to the curve, to the hall, to the sense that the walls themselves were guiding your way. Perhaps this is the deeper language of stone, to shape not only the place you stand, but the path your mind takes as you move within it. In spiral stairs and endless halls, the castle teaches patience, focus, and the strange comfort of being lost in something that has no need to be found. Some rooms in a castle seem to hold winter all year. They are not the grand chambers meant for lords or guests, but smaller spaces, antechambers, storage vaults, forgotten bedrooms tucked into corners of the keep. Step across their threshold and the air changes. The warmth from the hall behind you falls away, replaced by a coolness that feels older than the walls themselves. At first, the difference can be explained. Thick stone holds cold like a reservoir, releasing it slowly, especially in places that see little sun. Narrow windows, deep set and shaded, allow in only the faintest light. But the longer you stand there, the more the chill seems to press inward. It is not a simple absence of heat. It is a presence, a texture in the air that settles on the skin and seeps into the bones. Legends gather in such places. In one castle, the coldest room is a small square chamber beside the chapel. Visitors describe feeling as though they've stepped into a draft, though there is no visible gap in the walls. Some claim to hear a faint hum there, a sound too low to be wind. A centuries-old story says this was where the confessions of condemned prisoners were heard before execution. Whether or not it is true, the association clings to the air, and those who enter often leave quickly without knowing why. In another fortress, a narrow servant's room in the Upper East Tower is known for its unshakable chill. On summer days, when sunlight floods the outer wall, the temperature inside remains the same as in midwinter. Guides mention it in passing, a curiosity for those willing to climb the steep stair to find it. Those who linger sometimes speak of a subtle resistance, as if the air itself wishes them gone. Some accounts tie the cold to specific events: a betrayal discovered, a violent quarrel, a long illness that ended in isolation. Others suggest no cause at all, as though the chill is simply part of the stone's nature. What unites the stories is the sense that these rooms are set apart, held in a different season from the rest of the building. The feeling is not always unpleasant. One visitor, escaping the heat of a crowded tour, stepped into a flagged-floor chamber deep in the west wing. She described the coolness as like a hand on the forehead, a relief so sudden she closed her eyes and stayed for several minutes. Yet when she opened them, she felt oddly unsettled, as though she had been watched during her pause. Temperature, after all, is one of the most immediate sensations the body registers. A drop of only a few degrees can draw attention before the mind even names it. In these rooms, that drop feels deliberate, not the slow, natural cool of shaded stone, but an abrupt shift, as if you have stepped into a different layer of the building's memory. Some who study the paranormal suggest that cold spots are the residue of intense emotion, the lingering energy of moments too strong to fade. Others point to drafts, poor insulation, or hidden passages channeling air from elsewhere. The explanations vary, but the sensation remains the same: an invisible line crossed, an atmosphere that changes the moment you step inside. Light behaves differently in the cold rooms. Candles burn with a smaller flame, their warmth barely felt on the skin. In modern times, visitors have noticed their breath misting faintly, even when the rest of the castle is mild. Photographs taken here sometimes appear slightly blurred at the edges, as if the air itself is holding a thin frost. Perhaps the most striking thing is how quiet these rooms are. Sound seems dulled, as though wrapped in fabric. Your footsteps are muted, your voice lower without meaning to be. In some, there is a faint ringing in the ears, a sensation not unlike the pressure before a storm. Combined with the chill, it creates an impression of being held, not imprisoned, but set apart, as if the castle itself is asking you to pause. Few linger long. Even the curious tend to move on after a short while, stepping back into the comparative warmth with a small sigh. The return feels like waking from a shallow dream, a little disoriented, unsure how much time has passed. And yet, the memory of that cool air stays, a contrast against the body's stored heat. Whether born of architecture, weather, or something less tangible, the cold rooms remain among the castle's quietest mysteries. They do not call attention to themselves. They wait, patient and unchanging, for the next visitor to step inside and feel the subtle shift, the breath of a different age, the temperature of a story that has not yet let go. Some windows in a castle seem more than architectural. They are not merely openings for light or air, but eyes, unblinking, patient, and intent. Visitors notice them without always knowing why. A glance upward from the courtyard reveals a narrow slit set deep into the wall, a shadowed rectangle that feels aware of your presence. From within, these windows frame the world like portraits, holding it at a deliberate distance. In defensive design, windows were often arrow loops or gun ports cut to give the widest field of view with the smallest opening for return fire. From the inside, they taper outward, funneling vision toward a single point far beyond the walls. The effect is strange. To stand there is to feel that the castle has narrowed its gaze, focusing all attention on one distant patch of earth. Stories say that some of these windows remember what they have seen. In one coastal fortress, there is a slit high in the sea-facing wall where legend claims the ghost of a lookout still peers. Fishermen have sworn to glimpse a pale face in its shadow at dawn, watching the tides as though expecting sails on the horizon. The keepers smile at the tale, but admit that the stone around the window is worn smoother than anywhere else on that wall, as if centuries of leaning, human or otherwise, have polished it. Other windows are tied to quieter watchfulness. In a northern castle, a small square opening looks out over a narrow bridge that once served as the main approach. Visitors who stand before it often speak of feeling as though someone is just behind them, gazing out over their shoulder. One 19th century traveler wrote in his diary of standing there in winter dusk, and knowing without cause that another pair of eyes did reckon the distance of each approaching shape. The feeling is not always oppressive. Sometimes it carries a strange reassurance, as if the window's attention is a form of protection. A medieval poem about a border keep describes the stone eye that watches through all seasons, guarding those within from the dangers without. Yet even protective watching can carry weight. There is an intimacy in being seen even by something that cannot move or speak. Light behaves oddly in these places. On certain afternoons, the sun strikes directly through a narrow opening, casting a sharp line across the opposite wall. Dust motes drift through the beam, slow and deliberate, as if the air itself moves differently here. At night, moonlight finds its way in, creating a pale oval that seems brighter than it should, a patch of silver that shifts with the hours as though tracking its subject. Some windows have their own reputations. In a ruined hall, a high lancet window is said to have shown the same view for centuries, regardless of the weather. Travelers claim that when they look through it, they see not the present day, but a frozen image of the past. Fields without modern roads, the river unbridged, the far hills bare of houses. Whether an illusion of light or a trick of memory, the effect leaves an impression hard to shake. There are also tales of the reverse watch, when the one looking out finds themselves looked back upon. One visitor to a Scottish stronghold described peering through an upper tower window at the courtyard below, only to feel a sudden certainty that a figure was staring up at her from the shadows by the well. She waved in reflex. No one moved, and yet the sense of meeting another gaze lingered until she stepped away. Architects can explain much of this. Narrow windows create visual focus. The depth of the recess alters acoustics, so that sounds from outside carry strangely into the chamber. Changes in temperature near the opening may sharpen awareness, making one feel more present in the moment. But these explanations cannot quite dissolve the sensation that the window is participating in the act of seeing, as though it too is aware of the exchange. For centuries, windows were the castle's points of connection to the outside world. They were where news arrived, where smoke from distant fires was first spotted, where messengers' banners were seen long before they reached the gate. In this way, they were also thresholds, edges between safety and vulnerability. Perhaps that is why they feel alive. They have witnessed every approach, every departure, every threat, and every reprieve. In the quiet hours, standing before one of these openings can feel like leaning over a precipice in time. The view may be unchanged from 100, even 500 years ago. The wind comes through carrying scents from beyond the walls, wood smoke, salt, the dampness of rain on earth. It is easy to imagine that the castle is breathing them in, noting each as part of its long, unbroken vigil. Some believe the sensation of being watched comes not from the window itself, but from what lies just beyond it. A shadow in the trees that shifts too slowly to be wind. A figure glimpsed on the path who disappears when you step outside. In these moments, the watcher and the watched trade places without warning, and the frame of the window becomes a boundary neither side will cross. Whether they hold memories or simply frame them, these windows are more than empty apertures. They are witnesses, their shapes cut into the castle's body with intent. They have watched centuries unfold and have no need to close their gaze. For those who pause within their recesses, the sensation is unmistakable. The stone around you has been leaning forward for a very long time, and in its silent watch it includes you now in its endless view. By day, a castle is a monument, solid, monumental, rooted in the ground like a mountain carved into order. Its walls are clear to the eye, its shapes distinct, its details fixed in the logic of light. But when the sun sinks and darkness claims the stones, the castle changes. It does not simply rest beneath the night. It seems to wake into another existence, one hidden from the hours of daylight. The first change is in the light itself. Torches bloom against the walls, their flames bending in the night air, sending ripples of gold over gray stone. Lanterns sway in the hands of the few who still move through the corridors, and their glow is swallowed into corners that do not exist by day. The boundaries of rooms and courtyards soften. Walls stretch taller, arches seem deeper. The reach of shadow grows longer and more deliberate. And then comes the sound. In the day, a castle's voice is the noise of its inhabitants, footsteps, speech, the clatter of work. At night it speaks in other tones, the low creak of timber deep in the walls, the sigh of wind through the narrow slits, the far-off echo of something shifting in a forgotten chamber. The courtyard takes on a pulse of its own. A dropped leaf skitters across the flagstones, echoing louder than seems possible. Somewhere beyond sight, water drips in slow, deliberate rhythm. Even the silence feels layered, as though built from all the quiet moments the castle has ever held. Some who have slept within castle walls speak of a moment in the night when they woke without cause and found themselves certain the building was aware of them. They described lying still, listening, sensing that the space around them was not empty. The air seemed to carry a hum, faint but steady, like the breathing of a vast, slow creature. The transformation is not only in what the castle offers to the senses, but in what it seems to remember. The courtyard, empty under moonlight, can feel suddenly crowded with invisible company. A faint murmur rises and falls, not quite distinct enough to be words. The scent of wood smoke, though no fire burns, slips into the air. A window glows faintly as though lit from within, yet remains dark when approached. Historians might say that such impressions are the mind's way of filling absence, projecting life where there is none. But those who have felt it speak differently. They say the castle is not empty at night, it simply remembers in ways the living cannot fully see. The sound of boots crossing the drawbridge, the shouts of guards changing post, the rustle of fabric in a dance, all these moments have been lived here, and in the deep hours the place replays them for itself. The surreal nature of this nocturnal life comes in part from the way familiar spaces become strange. A stair you climbed a dozen times by day feels narrower in the dark. A hall you crossed without thought now stretches longer, its end swallowed in shadow. The mind begins to wonder if the castle is subtly rearranging itself, testing your sense of direction. Some even claim to have turned a familiar corner at night only to find a wall where a door should be, or to emerge in a room they do not recall from daylight. By morning, the layout is as it was. In these hours, the castle's moods shift like the weather. Sometimes it feels welcoming, the fire in the great hall burning with a steady warmth, the shadows deep but not unfriendly, the air carrying a soft scent of herbs from the kitchen. At other times, it is distant, its corridors holding an edge of watchfulness, its chambers cooler and quieter than comfort allows. The difference is subtle but palpable, as though the building itself is deciding what to reveal. There are moments when the night seems to reach backward through the centuries. You might stand on the wall walk, looking out over the moonlit fields, and feel certain you are seeing the same silvered land that a guard once saw hundreds of years ago. In that instant, time folds, not into a memory but into a shared present. The stones beneath your hands are the same. The wind against your face is unchanged. The castle stands between the same sky and earth. It is only you who will leave in the morning. Some speak of the midnight hour in a castle as its truest moment. The day's duties are long. Over even the evening's last embers are cooling, and the deep night takes hold. In that span, the building is entirely itself. Not host to visitors, not shield for soldiers, but a being of stone and air, carrying its centuries in silence. The moon may slip behind clouds, and the darkness within grows complete. It is in this unbroken black that some hear the faintest notes of music, or a single footstep on the stair, or a voice humming a tune that no one now alive remembers. It is not necessary to see anything to feel the second life. The knowledge is enough, the certainty that when the living world quiets, the castle's own rhythm begins. Some imagine it as a kind of dream, the building replaying moments from its long history. Others think of it as vigilance, the old walls standing guard over themselves, watching the shadows as they watched the edges of the known world long ago. By the time dawn comes, the transformation reverses. Light seeps into the highest windows, breaking the spell. The corridors grow clear again, their shapes definite, their distances fixed. The courtyard loses its hum, returning to the open stillness of stone and air. The castle does not seem diminished, only different, its second life folded away, kept close until the next night falls. And yet, for those who have been awake to witness it, the memory of the transformation lingers. The daylight castle is a place of history. The night castle is something else, a living presence, woven from shadow and sound, carrying its centuries in a breath too slow for human lungs. In that hidden life, the stones themselves seem to dream, and those dreams once glimpsed are not easily forgotten. Some rooms feel as though they have not moved forward with the rest of the world. You step inside and the air holds a weight, as if it has been waiting for you, not for your presence exactly, but for a witness. These are the rooms that remember. The impression comes quickly, often before you've had time to look around. It might be the quality of light, a pale, diffused glow that seems unchanged from a century ago. Or it could be the scent, faint but distinct, the trace of candle wax, the musk of old textiles, the whisper of wood long polished by human hands. Even the sound is different. Your footsteps fall into the air without much echo, as though they are being absorbed into a silence already full. In one castle, there is a small sitting room overlooking the gardens. The furniture is plain but dignified, its upholstery faded evenly, as though it has been waiting in stillness for years. Visitors sometimes remark that the room feels expectant, as though someone has just stepped out and will return any moment. A faint beam of light falls across the floorboards at the same angle each afternoon, giving the impression of time standing still. Another fortress keeps a high, narrow chamber known for a particular sense of unease. The guides do not speak of ghosts, only of a certain atmosphere that people notice. Those who linger describe feeling as though they have walked into a moment of deep argument or grief, one that has left an invisible residue in the air. The arrangement of the furniture, the worn patches on the rug, even the way the curtains hang seem to contribute to the sensation, the feeling that the room is locked in a fragment of its own history. Legends often grow around such places. A dining hall where a final feast was held before a siege, the laughter frozen into the air like breath on a winter night. A study where a letter was written that changed the fate of a family, the tension still folded into the corners. A bedchamber where a farewell was whispered in the early hours, the warmth of it somehow still clinging to the fabric of the space. Some explanations are practical. Rooms used for a single purpose over many years tend to gather sensory consistencies. A smell that lingers in the wood, a certain level of light, the way sound moves through the space. Visitors who are sensitive to such things may interpret these patterns as something more deliberate, more personal. And perhaps they are not wrong. It is in these rooms that time feels most porous. You might stand at a window and catch yourself imagining the view as it once was, the gardens untamed, the courtyard crowded with horses, the banners of visiting guests rippling in the wind. Your mind fills the space with figures you have never met, voices you have never heard, yet the fit is seamless, as though the room itself has supplied the images. Some report more tangible impressions. A woman visiting a preserved library claimed she heard the rustle of pages in a book, though she was alone and the volumes were secured behind glass. In another case, a man described the sensation of warmth on his back, as if from a nearby fire, though the hearth was cold and unused. Neither was frightened. Both spoke of a quiet recognition, as if the room had simply chosen to share a piece of its stored memory. The replay is rarely dramatic. There are no full reenactments, no scenes acted out in front of the living. Instead, it is as though the air leans toward a single memory, unable or unwilling to disperse it. The light in the corner stays the same shade, the faint smell remains constant. The hush never fully lifts. Perhaps the rooms that remember do so because something important once unfolded there, not important to history as a whole, but important to the lives lived within those walls. Or perhaps the castle itself, in its slow, inhuman way, chooses to keep certain moments close. Stone, after all, is patient. It can hold a silence for centuries without letting it fade. When you leave such a room, the change is immediate. The air outside feels different, lighter, less watchful. You may find yourself glancing back through the doorway, half expecting to see something shift in your absence. But the room will remain exactly as you left it, the same light, the same stillness, the same invisible hand holding time in place. And perhaps if you return, it will remember you too. If you stand still long enough inside an old castle, a strange thought can take hold, that the building is not inert, but alive in its own slow way. The sensation begins subtly, a faint vibration beneath your palm when you rest it on the stone, a gentle shift in the air as though the space has just inhaled. Stone has a way of holding warmth, of releasing it gradually in waves that can feel almost like breathing. In the great halls, the walls seem to exhale after sunset, sending faint drafts down from their height. In narrow passages, they radiate the coolness of night long into the day. Each change is minute, but together they create a rhythm, a quiet cycle of temperature and air that feels less like physics and more like pulse. The heartbeat, if there is one, is in the sounds the castle makes when no one is moving. Wood groans softly in the beams, metal fittings click and settle. A distant door thuds as the wind shifts through the corridors. These are not the random noises of decay. They are measured, almost patterned, like the internal workings of a vast creature adjusting itself to the hour. Even the walls themselves seem to have muscle. The mortar flexes with the seasons. Stone faces swell imperceptibly with heat, contract in cold. If you could listen closely enough, perhaps you would hear the faint scrape of grain against grain as the structure shifts. In such moments, the castle feels less like a place you inhabit and more like a being that tolerates your presence. Legends sometimes give castles voices. In one story, a garrison swore they heard the walls speak before a great storm, a deep hum that rose from the foundations and passed through every chamber. In another, a family claimed the building sighed each night after the last candle was snuffed, as if settling into sleep. These accounts, told without embellishment, suggest a familiarity with the idea that stone and timber might have their own language. There is also the matter of memory. If a castle holds its past in any conscious way, perhaps that memory is stored not in rooms or objects, but in the walls themselves. Every vibration, every touch, every sound has moved through them. The air inside their pores has been exchanged countless times with the breath of those who lived here. In this sense, the castle's pulse is not just physical. It is made of all the lives it has sheltered. Some people feel it more keenly than others. A visitor might pause in a doorway and feel a faint pressure in the chest, a sense that the building is aware of them. Others speak of moments when they matched their breathing to the rhythm of creaks and drafts, until the distinction between their own body and the body of the castle blurred. In the deep hours of night, when all movement ceases, the sensation can be strongest. The air grows still, yet the walls remain faintly warm against the hand, as though some inner process continues unseen. You might imagine that the castle is dreaming, its slow pulse carrying the images of centuries through its own hidden consciousness. Whether or not this is true, it is a thought that lingers once it occurs. You begin to notice the subtle signs, the way a corridor seems to tighten as a storm approaches, the faint hum in the stones when the wind strikes just right, the way the air in certain rooms seems to shift without anyone entering. These are the castle's small, private movements, the signs of life in a being too vast and patient to move quickly. And when you finally leave, stepping back into the open air, it is difficult not to glance at the walls one last time. They stand as they always have, unmoving, unblinking. But somewhere deep within you imagine a pulse continuing, steady and slow as it has for centuries, waiting for the next life to step inside and feel it. The coast of Scotland holds its castles like clenched fists against the wind. They stand on high, jagged cliffs, their stones worn and silvered by centuries of salt spray, their silhouettes stark against skies that seem never to rest. Even in calm weather, the air here tastes of storms yet to come. From the sea, these keeps appear as fragments of the rock itself, as though the cliffs had risen in defiance and taken on the shape of towers and walls. The waves below strike in constant rhythm, their spray reaching high enough to salt the parapets. Gulls wheel overhead, their cries carried away by the wind before they can settle on the ear. It is said that the weather here shapes not only the stone, but the spirits. The ghosts of these coastal castles are restless, moving with the same tides and tempests that pound the shore. Fishermen tell of pale figures pacing the cliff edge in gales, their cloaks and hair whipped by a wind that does not touch the living. Others speak of windows glowing faintly through rain-thick nights, long after the last light should have gone out. One keep, perched so close to the cliff that part of its wall has long since fallen into the sea, is home to the tale of the drowned laird. In the 1600s, during a violent storm, the castle's lord is said to have been swept from the battlements into the churning waters below. His body was never found. On nights when the tide runs high and the wind drives the spray over the walls, a figure in soaked finery is seen climbing the ruined stair, his face pale as sea foam, his boots leaving no mark on the wet stone. Another fortress farther north tells of the Grey Nurse, a spectral woman in a tattered uniform of service. During a siege centuries ago, she tended the wounded in the Great Hall. When the enemy broke through, she is said to have stayed at her post until the roof collapsed in flame. Visitors claim she still moves through the charred ruins during storms, her apron damp with seawater, her head bent as if listening for the cries of the injured. The wind funneling through broken arches can sound uncannily like her voice. Not all hauntings here are tied to tragedy. In one castle overlooking a narrow sea inlet, there is a legend of the piper's echo. Long ago, a piper was sent into a sea cave beneath the cliffs to search for smugglers. He played as he walked, the tune carrying up through the rock to the castle above. The music faded before the end of the song, and the piper was never seen again. Yet when storms drive the tide high into the cave, faint piping can be heard under the crash of the waves, a tune no one now alive can name. The Scottish weather is its own kind of presence in these stories. Rain lashes the stone like thrown gravel, and mist rolls in from the sea so thick that towers vanish within minutes. In such moments, the boundary between land and sky, between wall and cloud, dissolves. It is easy to imagine figures moving along the battlements, revealed only in flashes between veils of fog. Inside, the keeps are dim even in daylight. Narrow windows admit only slivers of the gray sky, their recesses deep and cold. The wind seeps in through every crack, carrying the scent of kelp and brine. In the great halls, the fire struggles against drafts, flames bending sideways in invisible currents. At night, when the storms rise, the sound is overwhelming, a mix of wind howling through arrow loops, rain hammering against the stone, and the deep boom of waves striking the cliff base. It is in this chaos that the spectral residents are most often seen, moving as if untouched by the elements. Historians note that many of these castles were built as much for status as for defense, their dramatic locations chosen to impress as well as protect. But the isolation and exposure also made them places of endurance, where life depended on reading the moods of sea and sky. Perhaps that is why so many of the stories here are tied to moments of weather, a storm that brought death, a fog that concealed an approach, a wind that carried a last signal from the shore. In some keeps, the hauntings seem to blend with the weather so completely that the two cannot be separated. The figure on the wall might be a trick of moonlight through moving clouds until it turns and vanishes against the wind. The voice in the stairwell might be nothing more than air rushing through a gap in the stone until it calls your name. These are places where the living rarely linger outdoors once darkness falls. The wind can strip warmth from the body in minutes, and the footing on the wet stone is treacherous. Yet for those who have braved the night, there are moments when the weather breaks, when the moon shines clear for a heartbeat, and the sea below glitters like a field of glass. In that stillness, the keeps seem to stand taller, as if recalling the pride of their first days. And sometimes in those rare calms, a figure can be seen at the highest point, looking not out to sea but inland, as though guarding something long forgotten. Whether shaped by storm or by story, the spirits of these Scottish cliffside castles carry the same qualities as the land itself: resilience, endurance, and a certain beautiful severity. They belong to the edge, where stone meets water, where life and weather are in constant negotiation. And just as the waves will keep breaking against the cliffs, the ghosts, if ghosts they are, will keep their watch. Storm-crowned and salt-bound for as long as the walls stand. In Japan, castles rise not from cliffs lashed by the sea, but from the stillness of plains, the curves of rivers, the guarded edges of mountain passes. Their white plaster walls gleam like bone in the moonlight, their layered roofs sweeping upward as if to lift the weight of centuries into the sky. Where the haunted fortresses of the West stand as fortresses of endurance, Japanese castles often feel like vast, sleeping beings, serene in form, but holding within them stories just as haunting. In the soft darkness, the approach is quiet. Stone ramparts climb in tiered layers, their curves shaped to deflect the rush of enemies, but also to guide the gaze upward toward the keep. The moat below catches the moon's reflection, turning the water into a shifting sheet of silver. Unlike the jagged outlines of many European castles, these shapes are clean and deliberate, every angle considered, every surface meant to invite contemplation as much as defense. The ghosts here do not shout their presence in storm or battle. They arrive with the patience of still water. In Japanese tradition, yurei, spirits bound by unfinished business or deep emotion, are not confined to the ruin or the dramatic battlement. They may appear in the courtyard garden beneath the boughs of a pine, in the narrow bridge between gates, or in the quiet corridor outside a chamber door. One story tells of a castle lady-in-waiting, wrongfully accused of betrayal, who was executed and cast into the moat. On moonlit nights, her pale form is said to drift along the water's surface, her long black hair spreading like ink through the reflection of the sky. Those who claim to have seen her speak not of fear, but of a deep sadness, an image so still it seems painted onto the water. Another tale speaks of a retainer who died defending his lord, his spirit returning not as an armored figure on the wall, but as a shadow in the paper-screened corridor. Guests walking there after nightfall report hearing the faint shuffle of tabby-clad feet, the slide of a door, the quiet sigh of someone who has carried a duty too long. The difference in tone is striking. In Western accounts, ghosts often appear as confrontations with the past, a guard still patrolling, a lady still searching, a voice calling out through the night. In these Japanese legends, the presence is more like a ripple in calm water, the momentary bending of the world's reflection. The eeriness comes not from suddenness, but from the quiet certainty that you have shared a moment with something that has been here far longer than you. The architecture itself shapes the encounter. Tatami floors absorb the sound of movement. Shoji screens diffuse light into soft gradients. Even the open spaces of the courtyards hold sound differently, the crunch of gravel paths echoing faintly against plaster and stone. The moonlight does not pierce so much as it spreads, touching every surface with a gentle silvery hand. In such conditions, the boundary between the living and the lingering feels delicate, as if a single breath might blur it completely. Some legends entwine the supernatural with loyalty and protection. In one mountain castle, a white fox spirit is said to appear in the gatehouse on nights of heavy mist. Those who see her, a slender figure, her eyes glinting like pale fire, say she turns her gaze outward toward the path from the valley as if watching for danger. There are no tales of her harming the living. Instead, she vanishes as the mist lifts, leaving only the scent of damp earth and wildflowers behind. In other places, the ghosts are tied to moments of betrayal. A famous story tells of a samurai ambushed by his own allies within the keep. His spirit is said to emerge only when the moon is half hidden by a cloud, his shadow falling across the threshold where he died. Those who step across it on such nights claim to feel a sudden weight in the air, a stillness that follows them for hours afterward, as though they have carried something away with them. To walk through these castles at night is to move through layers of stillness. The gardens hold the scent of pine and plum blossom even out of season. The moats reflect not only the keep, but the shifting sky, clouds drifting slowly over the mirrored moon. In the interior rooms, the air is cool and faintly fragrant from the cedar beams, the dim light bending gently at the edges of the paper walls. And yet, beneath this tranquility, there is an awareness, the sense that the place is not asleep but quietly attentive. The ghosts here do not rush forward. They watch, they wait. They appear only when the moment is right, and sometimes not at all. Their stories are carried as much in absence as in presence, in the empty veranda at midnight, in the sound of wind moving through the pines with the low, sighing tone of a human breath. When you leave such a place, the memory you carry is not of a figure in the dark or a cry in the night, but of a moment when the air seemed to shift, when the moonlight and the silence and the weight of centuries combined into something that felt alive. And whether or not you saw anything, you know that the citadel watched you go, holding your passage as one more story in its long moonlit vigil. In the deserts of the Middle East, castles and fortresses rise from the sand like the bones of ancient beasts, bleached by the sun and scoured by centuries of wind. Their walls are warm to the touch even after dusk, holding the day's heat deep in their stone. Against the vast emptiness of the surrounding plains, they seem impossibly self-contained, islands of shadow and memory in an ocean of light. By day, the air is sharp with heat. The horizon quivers and the stone walls shimmer in the distance as though they are half imagined. But it is at night, when the desert cools and the wind begins to move, that these ruins take on their true character. The sound of the wind is not constant here. It comes in waves, rising and falling, slipping through broken gates and hollow windows with a voice that changes from chamber to chamber. Local stories say that these winds carry the words of the past. In one fortress, a ruined citadel once guarding a caravan route, people speak of hearing traders bargaining in a dozen tongues long after the market square has turned to dust. Stand in the right archway on a moonlit night, they say, and you will hear coins clinking against stone, the shuffle of camels, the snap of tent cloth, all borne on the air, faint but unmistakable. Another ruin perched on a ridge above a dry wadi is known for a single haunting refrain. The wind there often gathers into a tone that sounds like a human voice calling across distance, not a word, but a drawn-out syllable that bends and fades. Bedouin herders who pass the place after dark avoid answering the sound, saying it belongs to the watchman who died when the fortress fell, and who still call for aid. The architecture itself shapes the wind into these voices. Narrow arrow slits become whistles. Vaulted chambers turn into resonating chambers where a breeze grows into a low hum. In one keep, a collapsed dome creates a hollow so perfectly tuned that even a slight current produces a note like a plucked string, rising in pitch as the gust strengthens, fading to silence when it passes. Visitors hearing it for the first time often stop mid-step, uncertain whether they have heard music or the breath of the place itself. There are legends, too, of winds that answer. A traveler once claimed to have sung a short line of a song into the open courtyard of a desert castle at night, only to hear the final note repeated back to him, carried from somewhere in the ruined towers. He left before trying again. Others tell of conversations caught in the air, snatches of dialogue that seem to pass through the listener without pausing, as though the voices are on their way elsewhere. These fortresses were built for endurance against siege and climate alike, their thick walls keeping out both enemies and the worst of the sun. But the desert is patient, and over centuries it has reclaimed them. Sand fills the lower chambers, piling against doors that once opened to bustling courtyards. Lintels carved with intricate designs are worn smooth, their details blurred into shadows. In the quiet hours, the wind strokes these surfaces, finding every edge and hollow, and in doing so plays the fortress like an instrument. It is not always eerie. There are nights when the air moves softly, curling through the ruins with a sound like quiet conversation at a distance. You cannot make out the words, but the tone is familiar. The rise and fall of people speaking without urgency, perhaps sharing news, perhaps remembering a story from long ago. In those moments, the place feels inhabited, not by restless spirits, but by the life it once held, lingering gently in the present. And yet, there are other nights when the wind arrives in sudden force, rattling the stones and setting the empty doorways to groaning. It rushes through the corridors like a messenger in haste, and the voices it carries are sharper, their tones edged with urgency or warning. More than one visitor has described feeling as though they were being urged to leave, the sound pursuing them down the slope until they reached the open plain. The desert has its own way of holding sound. In the stillness between gusts, silence falls so completely that you can hear your own heartbeat, the shifting of your clothing, the faint hiss of sand settling. This deep quiet makes the return of the wind feel almost intentional, like the intake of breath before a voice speaks. The mind, tuned to expect nothing, becomes alert to the smallest hint of a whisper. Perhaps this is why the stories endure, not because every sound is unexplainable, but because the desert gives each one room to become something more. The wind might be only wind, but here in these hollowed fortresses under the moon, it feels like a carrier of messages. Whether those messages are for the living or only for the place itself remains unknown. When you leave such a ruin, the sound follows you for a while, caught in the folds of your memory. Even in silence, you might recall the low, steady call through the arches, or the brief, bright note from a hidden dome. Long after you've stepped back into the open desert, the fortress seems to remain behind you, breathing out into the night, its whispered words riding the wind toward some listener yet to arrive. In the quiet rooms where history is kept, the past is often written in the language of kings and treaties, of battles and lineages. But hidden between these grand accounts are smaller lines, almost shy in their brevity. Notes from those who recorded the official truth, yet could not ignore what they had seen with their own eyes. These scribes, bound to duty and precision, wrote in a style meant to endure. Their ink was steady, their handwriting disciplined, their words carefully weighed. And still the shadows crept in. Not the shadows of metaphor, but of actual shape and movement, described with the same calm authority as the tally of supplies or the outcome of a siege. One entry, preserved in the archive of a 14th century border castle, begins with a list of provisions. Sacks of grain, barrels of ale, the repair of a damaged gate hinge. Then, without pause, comes the line. A figure was observed in the lower passage, moving against the draft, carrying no light. Upon search, none was found. No explanation follows. The scribe simply moves on to note the delivery of timber for winter. It is the restraint that makes these moments striking. The chroniclers were not in the habit of storytelling. Their work was to create records free from embellishment. So when they mention a shadow passing along the wall or a sound without visible cause, the absence of flourish makes it more convincing. They do not linger on the mystery, they acknowledge it and continue. In the archives of a coastal fortress, an entry from the late 1500s reports the inspection of the eastern tower. The keeper notes that all arrow slits were secure, that the parapet was in good repair, and then adds, "A voice was heard within the wall, speaking in a tongue unknown." Masonry found intact. No attempt is made to interpret the event. It is filed as fact alongside inventories of oil, rope, and powder. Such moments were never intended to be read as ghost stories. To the scribes, they were incidents, part of the total account of the place. But across centuries, the accumulation of these small, unadorned observations creates its own pattern. Perhaps the most unsettling comes from a fortress deep in the mountains. The scribe writes of a winter so harsh that the gates were frozen shut for weeks. Food stores were counted daily. On the night of the new moon, while the men slept in the hall, a guard heard footsteps descending the north stair. The stair was sealed from snow at both ends. The entry ends there, the matter neither solved nor dismissed. When these records are read now, their dryness becomes part of the unease. There is no attempt to convince, no dramatic flourish. The scribes did not write for an audience like ours. They wrote for the continuity of record, for the practical use of those who would come after. And yet, in doing so, they have given us something more. Moments when the veil between the ordinary and the inexplicable thinned enough to be noticed, even by those whose lives were defined by order. Folklore often grows from such seeds. A note about a voice in the wall becomes, in retelling, the story of a mason trapped inside. A report of a figure in the lower passage transforms into the legend of a spectral guard who walks his post forever. The embellishments are easy to track, but the fact remains. There was a first account, plain and unadorned, written by a hand that had no interest in myth. In some archives, the scribes even acknowledge the limits of their certainty. A 17th century record from a hilltop keep includes the line, "Unclear if the shadow observed was cast by man or other cause. Air in the hall notably cold." That single sentence has fueled centuries of speculation, yet in its own time it was likely just a note of conditions, a detail meant to be taken with all the others. Reading these accounts today, you begin to imagine the scribes themselves. Seated at long tables lit by oil lamps, their quills scratching over parchment, the air smelling faintly of smoke and ink. The castle around them would have been quieter than most could tolerate. The only sounds the occasional step in the corridor or the sigh of wind at the shutters. Perhaps they looked up from their work once in a while, seeing nothing, and returned to their writing. Perhaps once in a great while they saw something they could not explain, and chose to record it with the same steady hand they used for everything else. In the end, these records are not ghost stories. They are glimpses, factual in form, haunting in content. They remind us that even in an age before our modern fascination with the supernatural, people noticed when the air changed, when a sound had no source, when a shadow moved in ways the light could not account for. And they wrote it down, not as wonder, not as fear, but as part of the simple, unvarnished truth of life within the walls. It is this lack of embellishment that makes them so enduring. The scribes did not try to make sense of what they saw. They left that to those who would come later, to us reading in the dim quiet of another place, feeling the same subtle shift in the air, wondering what might move in the corner of the eye when the ink has dried and the room grows still. Some of the most vivid accounts of castle hauntings were never meant for public eyes. They live in letters, folded, sealed, and sent in confidence, carrying the voices of people who wrote not as historians or scribes, but as witnesses speaking privately to someone they trusted. These letters rarely survive in complete bundles. Many are fragments, kept because they were tucked inside family archives or hidden in the pages of books. The handwriting is hurried or uneven in places, as though the writer was capturing the memory before it faded, or writing late at night, reluctant to turn out the lamp until the words were on paper. One such letter, written in 1823 by a governess employed in a northern fortress-turned-manor, begins with the ordinary: the health of her pupils, the improvement of the gardens. Then, without transition, she adds, "I have twice now seen the woman in gray pass along the upper corridor. She is gone before I can reach her, but I hear the skirts distinctly upon the boards. I am determined not to speak of it to the children." Another comes from a soldier stationed in a coastal keep during the First World War. In a note to his sister, he writes of the night rounds and the cold wind off the sea, and then, "At the east wall I heard the tread of boots beside my own. I called, thinking it was Shaw, but no answer came. When I turned, I found myself alone in the archway. The steps continued another 3 paces before they stopped altogether." He closes the paragraph with, "It is better not to mention this to Mother." Some letters mingle the haunting with confession. 1897, a visiting scholar staying at a partially ruined castle in France wrote to a colleague about his research into local folklore. Halfway down the page, his tone shifts. "I feel compelled to tell you that I have begun to dread the West Library after nightfall. There is a sense of occupation there, and more than once I have heard the sound of pages turned, though I am alone. Forgive me for writing this. It is a thing I cannot put into the public record without risk of ridicule. The private nature of these accounts is what makes them so revealing." In public, most of these people would have spoken with caution, framing any strange occurrence as a curiosity or dismissing it entirely. In the privacy of a letter, they could write plainly, not to convince, but to share. The language is often restrained, but the details carry an intimacy absent from official reports. The texture of a shadow, the weight of a pause before a door opens, the faint warmth left in the air after an unseen presence passes. Some of the most affecting letters come from those who did not consider themselves believers. A merchant staying in a fortified manor in 1774 wrote to his wife, "You know I have no patience for ghost tales. Yet I am troubled by a thing I saw here. In the gallery I passed a gentleman in black. I nodded to him and he to me. When I looked back, the hall was empty. I will not say more except that it was broad daylight." In rare cases, the letter becomes almost a dialogue with the recipient about the experience. A young noblewoman in the early 18th century describes to her cousin the cold she felt in her chamber one autumn night, the way the curtains moved without breeze, and the figure she thought she saw at the foot of her bed. Her cousin's reply, preserved alongside the original, urges her to remember the old stories and to speak to the housekeeper for the names of past occupants. The exchange ends there, leaving the reader to imagine what, if anything, was discovered. Because these letters were written without the expectation of being read by strangers, they are free of performance. They are not trying to build legend or entertain. Even when the language is formal, there is an undercurrent of vulnerability, a writer confiding in someone they trust because the experience has left them unsettled, curious, or quietly shaken. Over time, many of these private accounts have been absorbed into the larger folklore of their respective castles, sometimes losing their original voice in the retelling. But when the original letter survives, it feels as though the moment has been preserved in amber. The reader can almost hear the scratch of the pen, see the ink drying, imagine the hand folding the paper and sealing it away, sending the story into the care of someone far from the place where it happened. These correspondences remind us that history is not only the record of public acts and official events, it is also the quiet passing of moments from one person to another, the trust placed in a friend or a family member to hold a story that feels too fragile or too strange to offer to the world. And in that trust, the haunting becomes more than a tale. It becomes a private truth, carried in ink across distance, folded into the long memory of both the living and the dead. For historians, the castle is a double challenge. It is both a structure of stone, measurable and datable, and a container of stories that resist being pinned to a page. To write its history is to choose, to decide what belongs in the clear light of fact, and what should be left in the soft shadow where memory and imagination meet. The work begins in evidence, charters, inventories, letters, maps. These are the anchors, the things that can be verified, compared, cited. They give the skeleton of the past, each piece fitted into a sequence of years. Yet around this framework hangs another body entirely, built of whispered accounts, inherited tales, sudden moments in which the ordinary falters. The historian faces a temptation. To include these stories risks credibility in certain circles. A report of footsteps with no source, a chamber that chills without reason, a figure glimpsed where no one stands. These are not the language of scholarship. And yet to leave them out is to cut away something essential, for these moments are part of the lived experience of the place. In the margins of published works, the struggle is visible. A cautious phrase, according to local tradition, acts as a shield. A curious detail is placed in an appendix offered without commentary. Sometimes the story is mentioned only in passing, as though to acknowledge it without inviting debate. In this way, the haunting survives, but as a guest at the edge of the official record. Some historians take the opposite approach, allowing the mystery to stand alongside the fact without hierarchy. They will note the date of a battle and in the same breath the appearance of a pale horse on the field the night before, witnessed by 3 soldiers whose names are recorded. This style refuses to treat the inexplicable as less real simply because it cannot be measured. The tension is not new. Even in medieval chronicles, one finds moments when the scribe pauses to remark on a strange light in the sky or a voice heard in an empty hall. The difference is that then, the supernatural was often woven into the logic of the world. Today, the historian is expected to draw a sharper line, and in doing so, risks creating a history that is precise but incomplete. The dilemma deepens when the mystery is not a single event but a pattern. When accounts of the same apparition appear in sources centuries apart, the historian must decide: is this persistence evidence of invention or of something that endures beyond explanation? The choice of interpretation shapes not only the page, but the reader's sense of what history is allowed to contain. Privately, some historians admit to their own moments of hesitation, standing in an archive, holding a document in which a long-dead voice describes something that cannot be explained. The penmanship is steady, the ink faded but clear, the date precise, and yet the content resists placement within the tidy architecture of fact. What to do with such a thing? To file it under legend is to risk dismissing it. To treat it as fact is to invite doubt. Perhaps the answer is not in resolution but in balance. The historian may offer the date, the context, the verifiable details, and then present the mystery as it has been told, without claiming to solve it. In doing so, they preserve the integrity of both. The fact remains a fact. The story remains a story. The reader is left to walk between them as one might walk through a castle at dusk, moving from the clear light of the courtyard into the shadowed halls where the air feels different and something unseen waits just beyond sight. In the end, the historian's dilemma mirrors the castle's own nature. Both are built of the solid and the uncertain, the measurable and the fleeting. To deny either is to misunderstand the whole. And so the careful chronicler learns to let the two stand together, allowing the record to hold not only what can be proved, but also what has been felt, feared, or dreamed, for these too are part of the long life of stone. Long before ghost stories were written down, they lived in the glow of the hearth. In the drafty rooms of castles, in the cottages huddled against their outer walls, the fire was the gathering point, its warmth a counter to the cold stone, its light a ward against the darkness just beyond the door. Here stories moved from voice to ear, reshaped with each telling, carrying not only the words but the breath and presence of the teller. The setting mattered. Outside, the wind might howl through arrow slits or sweep across the courtyard in restless gusts. Inside, the flames snapped and shifted, throwing shadows that danced on the walls. Children sat cross-legged on rugs or benches, their eyes catching the gold of the light. Elders leaned forward in chairs, speaking in low, measured tones. In that circle, the world beyond the fire seemed distant but not entirely gone. The content of the stories was often dark: apparitions on staircases, voices in the night, battles fought by the dead, yet the act of telling made them something more than frightening. The hearth gave a frame to the fear. You could listen to a tale of a headless horseman riding the moors and still feel safe because the fire was steady, the company close, and the night held at bay. One elderly groundskeeper once described the stories of his youth as a way to make the castle ours at night. The adults told of the gray lady who passed the upper gallery, or the soldier who kept his watch on the wall long after the war was over. But in their telling, there was no panic, only familiarity. These figures were introduced almost like distant relatives, their habits and appearances recounted with the same detail as a neighbor's. This blending of the eerie with the familiar is part of why such stories endure. Around the fire, a ghost is not only a warning or an omen, it is part of the shared history of the place. A child who hears the tale from a grandparent may one day tell it to their own grandchildren, carrying not just the plot but the sound of that older voice, the smell of the burning wood, the comfort of that safe space. The rhythm of the telling was important too. The best storytellers knew how to draw a pause before the shadow appeared, how to lower their voice until the listeners leaned in, how to lift it again to release the tension. They understood that the story was as much in the silences as in the words, in the moments when the listener's mind filled the gap with its own imagined shapes. In some households, the fireside telling was seasonal. Autumn brought the longer nights and the return of certain tales, often tied to events said to have happened in the same month centuries before. In others, the stories came unplanned, sparked by a stray noise from the hall or the sight of the firelight catching a piece of old armor in the corner. The spontaneity made them all the more alive, as though the ghosts themselves had prompted the telling. It was not only families who kept the tradition. In the servants' quarters of larger castles, the same rituals unfolded. After the day's work was done, those who lived and labored within the walls gathered near the kitchen hearth, swapping tales of their own experiences or passing along the legends they had heard from others. Here, the hierarchy of the day dissolved for a time. All were equal before the fire and the story. Even visitors could be drawn into the circle. A traveler spending the night might be invited to share a tale from their own home, and in return would hear the local hauntings. In this way, ghost stories traveled across borders, carried not by ink and paper, but by the warmth of a fire and the willingness of strangers to lean in and listen. The fireside gave the stories a shape that could hold both fear and comfort. A haunting told in the cold, echoing hall of a castle might chill the listener to the bone. Told beside the fire with the smell of wood smoke and the soft weight of a blanket across the knees, the same haunting could become a treasured piece of lore, something to be remembered and repeated rather than fled from. And yet, the comfort was never complete. The fire could keep the cold at bay, but it could not erase the knowledge that somewhere in the dark, beyond the circle of light, the castle still stood, its upper halls empty, its battlements exposed to the wind, its oldest stones holding centuries of silence. The stories reminded everyone that the safety of the fire was temporary, and that the night, with all its uncertainties, would still be waiting when the embers cooled. Perhaps this is why fireside tellings carried such weight. They allowed people to face the darkness together, to name its shapes, and in naming them, to make them part of the shared life of the place. The ghosts became less like intruders and more like residents whose presence was acknowledged, if never fully understood. In the end, the fire was both shield and stage, a place where the living gathered to keep the cold and the dark at bay, and where the stories of those long gone could step briefly into the light before returning to the shadows. And as the logs burned down to glowing coals, the last words of the tale often lingered in the air, carried into the night on the faint breath of smoke. In some families, the passing down of a castle is not simply the transfer of stone and land. It is the inheritance of sound, the measured tread on a staircase at midnight, the creak of a door that no hand touches, the soft rhythmic knock in an empty corridor. These are not accidents to be explained away, but part of the household's long memory, accepted as naturally as the portraits on the walls or the pattern of winter drafts through the hall. The heirs grow up with these sounds as part of their lives. As children, they hear them in the company of elders who neither flinch nor hush the noise. A faint step overhead during supper might prompt nothing more than a glance and a wry remark. Your great-uncle is making his rounds again. In such moments, the supernatural is not a source of terror, but a thread in the family fabric, strange, yes, but familiar. One lineage in the south of England speaks of a library walker, a figure heard pacing between shelves in the oldest part of the house. The story says he was a learned ancestor who died before finishing a certain manuscript, and so continues his search in the afterlife. Successive generations have reported the sound, measured steps from one end of the room to the other, pausing occasionally as though to consult a book. The family does not attempt to stop it. The footsteps are as much a part of the library as the oak panels and the dust in the corners. In a castle in the Scottish Highlands, the inherited sound is that of boots on the stone spiral stair. The family knows the steps well, a slow ascent, one tread at a time, never hurrying. The current owner, who has lived there since childhood, says that hearing them now is oddly comforting. It means the castle is awake, that it remembers who it has sheltered. These stories pass as part of the home's identity. In the telling, they shift slightly, a detail altered, a description refined, but the essence remains. The heirs learn not only the events of the past, but the signs of its continued presence. They are taught how to tell the difference between the settling of stone and the tread of something unseen, how to listen without fear. In some cases, the inheritance includes direct encounters. A young woman who returned to her family's castle after years abroad wrote in her journal about waking one night to the sound of someone moving in her room. She opened her eyes to see the faint shape of a figure standing near the window, motionless, watching. She lit no candle, spoke no word, only lay still until the figure faded into the dark. In the morning, she told her father, who simply nodded and said, "You've met the night watchman. He looks in on everyone sooner or later." The attachment to these presences can be strong. One family tells of selling their ancestral castle in the mid-20th century. Years later, the heir returned for a visit and asked the new owner if the hallway musician still played at night. The puzzled look he received was followed months later by a letter. "We have heard it now. A few notes, always the same, just before midnight." You were right. The new occupants had inherited the ghost along with the walls. These inherited hauntings are rarely treated as problems to be solved. They are part of the atmosphere, the personality of the place. Attempts to banish them are almost unheard of, perhaps because to remove them would feel like erasing part of the family's own story. In some households, the ghost is even included in the tour given to guests, introduced in the same tone as a living relative's quirks. The continuity across generations deepens the sense of permanence. The child who hears the steps on the stair grows into the adult who hears them again decades later, and perhaps one day becomes the elder who explains them to their own children. The ghost becomes a shared companion through time, aging with the family in memory if not in form. To inherit a castle is to inherit its solitude, its long corridors, its echoes. But for those whose families have lived with the same unaccountable sounds for centuries, it is also to inherit a relationship not with the unknown in general, but with a specific presence that has shared the house for longer than any living member. The footsteps are a reminder that the story of the place is still being told, even when no one is speaking. And so the heirs keep listening. They learn the rhythms, the pauses, the subtle changes in pace that might mean something new. They walk the same halls, sleep in the same rooms, sit by the same fires, and from time to time they hear the sound that tells them they are not the only ones to have claimed the castle as home. Some ghost stories live so long that the first voice to speak them is lost entirely. The names fade, the details shift, the centuries pass, yet the tale remains, like a candle kept burning through countless hands. What survives is not the memory of a single event, but the memory of the memory passed on until it feels as much a part of the place as the stones themselves. In these cases, no one can say exactly when the story began. Ask a dozen people in the village below the castle and you may hear a dozen versions. 1. The specter is a grieving bride. In another, a betrayed soldier. In a third, a nameless figure who appears without cause or warning. The variations matter less than the fact that the story continues to be told, unmoored from its origin yet anchored to the same halls and battlements. One fortress in Eastern Europe holds such a tale, a figure seen in the highest tower on moonless nights. The villagers have no record of who it might be. Parish registers, estate documents, even old letters offer nothing. And yet the sighting has been reported for as long as anyone can remember. The figure is described the same way each time, standing still, facing outward, the wind moving through hair or cloak. The tower itself has been rebuilt twice since the first known account, but the presence endures as though tied not to the structure but to the place itself. In another case, the haunting is not visual but audible. For centuries, people have spoken of hearing a slow knock, 3 beats, echoing in the chapel of a castle in the lowlands. The sound has been heard in times of peace and in times of siege, in bright daylight and in the stillest hours of the night. No one recalls why the knocking began or whether it was ever linked to a particular death or vow. The meaning, if there ever was one, is gone. But the rhythm remains, as familiar to the local ear as the tolling of the church bell. There is a strange resilience in these orphaned stories. Stripped of their beginnings, they become less about the truth of a single event and more about the way they are held in place. They are untethered from proof, yet impossible to dismiss, for they have been repeated by too many voices across too many years to be entirely set aside. Sometimes fragments of origin resurface, a faded diary, a half-legible entry in a ledger offering a glimpse into what might have been the first telling. Yet even when such evidence appears, it rarely erases the layers the story has gathered. By then, the legend has taken on a life of its own, shaped by the fears, hopes, and imaginations of generations. The original event becomes only one thread in a much larger fabric. For those who live with these inherited memories, the lack of origin can be part of the allure. Without a clear beginning, there is no closure, no fixed meaning. The story is not tied to a single date or name, so it feels timeless, a presence that has always been and may always be. Visitors might press for facts, but the locals often shrug as though the need for proof is beside the point. What matters is that the story belongs here and nowhere else. In this way, the memory that outlives the teller becomes more than history. It becomes part of the castle's identity, a living thread woven into the atmosphere. The tale may not be written in any official record, yet it lingers in the way people speak of the place, in the way they glance toward a certain window, in the pause before they step into a particular corridor. And so the story continues, told at firesides, on guided tours, in casual conversations between neighbors. It moves through time without the need for proof, carried not by the certainty of its origin, but by the certainty of its presence. Long after the first voice is gone, the echo remains, whispering through the stone, reminding all who hear it that some memories are too deeply rooted to fade. Twilight comes slowly to a castle. The sun dips toward the horizon, and the last gold of the day gathers along the upper walls, clinging to the stone as if reluctant to leave. Shadows stretch across the courtyard, deepening in the corners where the light no longer reaches. The air changes first, a soft cooling that seeps into the mortar, loosening the day's heat until the stones themselves begin to breathe out a faint chill. From the towers, the view is both expansive and intimate. The land beyond lies open, fading from color into silhouette. Hills soften into shapes, rivers turn from silver to black. The sky overhead holds its last pale blue, cut by streaks of rose and violet before all begins to sink into a single tone. The first stars appear in the east, faint and shy at first, then steady, their light clear against the gathering dark. Within the walls, the shift is more than visual. Sounds carry differently now. The ring of a boot on flagstone seems sharper, yet also more distant, as though the walls are listening. Birds that nested in the eaves all day fall silent, their wings folded. In their place comes the faint rustle of bats leaving the high crevices, their movements quick, almost invisible. The castle at twilight is a threshold. It is no longer the place it was in the daylight, open, defensible, defined by clear lines and sharp detail, nor yet the realm it will be in full night, where every shadow hides depth and movement. It stands in between, its identity shifting with the light. In this hour, the towers seem taller, their edges softened by the dim. Flags or weather vanes turn slowly in the cooling air, catching the last glint of the sun before they too are claimed by shadow. The upper battlements, so exposed and bright at midday, now feel like the edges of a dream, high enough to see the world fall into darkness, close enough to sense the change happening in the stones beneath your feet. Inside, lamps and torches are lit, their glow spilling in warm pools along the corridors. The contrast is sharp. Beyond the archways, the outer walls hold the deepening blue of evening. Within, the light flickers, casting gold across rough surfaces. It is a reminder of the castle's dual nature, a structure that both shelters and exposes, that holds the light while watching the darkness gather. For centuries, this was the hour of heightened awareness. Guards on the walls tightened their grips on spears, eyes searching the dimming landscape for movement. Servants hurried to complete tasks before night made the work harder. In the great halls, fires were stoked higher and meals laid out while there was still light to see by. The approach of night was not only a change in mood, but a shift in readiness, a collective drawing in. And yet, for all its practicality, twilight carried an enchantment. The soft colors, the cooling air, the first glimmer of lamps in distant windows, all created a sense that the world was leaning toward quiet. The castle seemed to join in this rhythm, settling into its foundations, its stones growing still after the long glare of day. In this light, even familiar details take on new weight. A worn groove in the stair seems deeper, the marks of long use more pronounced. The grain in the wood of a door appears richer, its patterns like the rings of a tree counting years in silence. The walls themselves seem more textured, each stone catching the last light differently, holding it for a breath longer before letting it fade. As the final glow slips from the highest tower, the change is complete. The castle becomes a silhouette against the sky, its windows lit from within like watchful eyes. The towers no longer mark distance or defense. They stand now as keepers of the night, rising into a darkness that seems infinite. It is in this moment more than any other that the mood shifts. The day's clarity is gone. The edges of things have softened. What was once certain in the daylight now feels less fixed. Corridors seem longer, courtyards quieter, the distance to the far wall greater than it was an hour ago. The castle breathes differently now, slow, deep, steady, as though preparing for a different kind of life. Twilight on the towers is the overture to that life. It is the pause between the known and the unknown, the last chance to see the place as it is before the night makes it something else entirely. And as the first true darkness settles over the stone, the listener, whether standing on the battlements or sitting in a room below, feels the same shift within themselves. A readiness to step into whatever the night will bring, guided by the memory of that last lingering light. Every castle has gates, some heavy with iron, others carved from ancient oak, some reduced to weathered archways where the doors are long gone. In daylight, they are thresholds for feet and carts, measured in practical terms of entry and defense. But in the quiet hours of night, another kind of gate opens, one that cannot be barred, one through which the past moves freely, as if it has been waiting for darkness to lift the latch. These are the gates that never close. They stand not in stone but in the mind, invisible yet felt, opening without sound. Step through them in a dream, and the years fall away as effortlessly as mist at sunrise. The courtyard is no longer a ruin but alive with movement. The kitchens ring with voices. The stables are warm with the breath of horses. Lanterns swing from hooks, casting their steady glow on walls still unscarred by centuries. The transition is seamless. You might be walking in the present, your palm against cool stone, your ears filled with the wind, and with a single blink, find yourself in another century. The air is warmer, scented with wood smoke and something sweet baking in an unseen oven. A figure passes by, nodding as if your presence is unremarkable. The gate has opened without asking, and you are inside the memory the castle keeps for itself. Not every dreamer chooses to cross. Some sense the opening and turn away, fearing what may follow if they step too far. For the past is not all celebration and warmth. It carries with it the shadows of its own nights. The same gates that lead to banquet halls can open onto siege lines or to chambers where voices speak in urgent whispers. The past does not sort itself for comfort, it offers what it holds in all its weight. And yet many do cross, willingly or without realizing, drawn by the pull of something half-recognized. Often it begins with sound, a rhythm of hooves on cobblestone, the soft clatter of pewter plates, the rustle of silk brushing a stone stair. These sounds lead you forward until the archway looms, and before you can think to measure the step, you have taken it. Some say the gates never close because they were never meant to. A castle is built to hold people, to witness their lives, to carry their echoes. Why should it deny passage to those echoes or to the living who wish to walk among them? Others believe the gates remain open only for those who come without expectation, who drift into dreams without seeking control, allowing the past to choose the form it takes. In waking life, the sensation can be subtler but no less vivid. A visitor might stand before a gatehouse and feel the distinct impression of a crowd just beyond, the air full, though the space is empty. Or they may walk under a portcullis and be struck by the certainty that they have been here before, though no photograph or map can explain when. The mind becomes a lantern, throwing light into corners it has never seen. For those who live in such places, the gates are part of the rhythm of life. They may not speak of them openly, but they know the moments when the past presses close. A sudden change in the air, a faint scent with no source, a fleeting image caught at the edge of vision. The gates swing open and shut without sound, but the feeling is unmistakable. In dreams, these gates often return the same way they opened, without ceremony. One moment you are walking a torchlit passage. The next you are lying in your bed, the night outside unchanged. But the images linger with the clarity of waking memory, as if you could walk back to them if you only knew the way. Some claim to have brought something back through these gates, not objects, but impressions so strong they change the way the castle feels by day. A hall that once seemed bare now carries the warmth of imagined voices. A ruined chamber feels intact, the shape of its furnishings still present in the mind's eye. The dream becomes a map, and the waking world follows it. Perhaps this is why the gates never close, because the past is not a locked vault, but a river whose current sometimes runs alongside our own. In sleep, in stillness, in moments of quiet attention, we find the crossings, and for a time we step onto the other bank. The stones underfoot are the same, yet entirely different. The voices are near enough to hear, though they belong to another age. And when the gate swings shut again, we carry the echo of its hinges in our thoughts, knowing it will open once more when the night is right. The hall is vast, its ceiling lost in darkness, the air cool and still. Somewhere beyond sight, the wind moves faintly through high windows, its whisper folding into the silence. You stand at the threshold, and there, far down the length of the stone floor, a single lantern burns. Its light is soft, not the bright flare of new oil, but the steady glow of a flame that has been tended for hours. It casts a narrow pool, spilling gold across the flagstones and drawing long, delicate shadows up the walls. The rest of the hall lies in quiet obscurity, each column and arch fading into shades of charcoal and silver. The lantern does not waver when you move toward it. Its glow is constant, a calm presence in the immensity of the room. The sound of your own steps feels louder than it should, each one ringing out, then softening as you come closer. The stone beneath your feet holds the coolness of night, but the air near the lantern is warmer, touched by its light. You begin to notice the way the flame moves, not restless but slow and deliberate, as if in sync with a rhythm you cannot hear. The shadows it makes shift gently along the walls, drawing shapes that seem almost alive. A curve like a bowed head, an arch that feels like a raised hand, a narrowing of light that could be the hem of a cloak caught mid-step. It is here, in this balance of light and dark, that the hall feels most awake. Not in the loud hours of day, nor in the absolute black of midnight, but in this moment when one flame is enough to keep the room company. The lantern becomes a point of orientation, not only for your eyes but for your thoughts, anchoring you against the vastness pressing in from all sides. In the old days, such a lantern might have been left burning for a late arrival, or to mark the way for someone passing through. But here now, There is no sign of a keeper. No footsteps approach, no voices murmur beyond the walls. The lantern simply exists, as if it has always been here waiting. Some say that in castles like this, a light in the hall is a form of welcome, not for the living, but for the memories that still walk the corridors. It is a signal that the space is tended, that it remembers its purpose as a place of gathering and passage. A lantern left burning is a promise. The way will not be lost, even in the deepest hours. You pause near it, close enough to see the texture of the glass, the fine scratches on the metal frame. The light inside is richer now, bright enough to reveal the faint outlines of the stones nearby, the uneven edges where centuries of use have worn them smooth. Beyond this pool of light, the darkness seems deeper but less empty, as though it holds its own quiet shapes watching from the edge. Perhaps this is why the presence feels calm, not threatening. The lantern's glow does not push the dark away. It simply lives within it, marking a space of stillness. You could sit here for hours, the silence punctuated only by the faint crackle of the flame and the distant sigh of wind through unseen openings. It is easy to imagine that others have stood where you stand, drawn toward this same light. A traveler arriving late, a servant carrying news, a guard pausing between rounds, each finding in the lantern a moment of pause before moving on. The memory of their footsteps seems to linger in the floor, just beyond the reach of the glow. Time moves differently here. The flame leans slightly, rights itself, leans again, and in those small motions the hours seem to pass unnoticed. You begin to feel the hall as the lantern must, not as a place to cross quickly, but as a space to inhabit, to hold quietly in the mind. When you turn to look back toward the entrance, the doorway is darker than before, its edges blurred. Ahead, beyond the lantern, the hall stretches on, disappearing into shadow. There is a sense that if you walked past the light, you might never find its glow again, that you would step into another space entirely, unlit and unknown. And so you remain for a while, neither advancing nor retreating, letting the light draw you into its stillness. The castle around you is vast, filled with unseen rooms and silent towers, but here, in this one pool of warmth, the world has narrowed to the slow breathing of a flame. At last you understand. The lantern is not there to guide you somewhere else. It is there to remind you that even in the largest and oldest of places, there can be moments of intimacy. Small, steadfast lights that keep the darkness from becoming emptiness. When you step away, the glow follows you in memory, its shape and warmth lingering like a promise. Even after the hall is behind you, it remains a quiet mark on the night, a point you could find again in dreams. For in castles such as this, some lights never truly go out. There is a room in the castle that no one has ever entered awake. Its walls are of the same stone as the rest of the fortress, yet in waking light it does not exist. No passage leads to it, no stair climbs toward it. You will not find it on any plan, nor will the oldest caretakers admit to knowing where it lies. And yet those who have dreamt of the place describe it in such detail that it feels as real as the stones beneath your feet. It begins in sleep. You are walking a corridor you have walked before, lit by a faint silvery glow. The air feels heavier here, though not cold, more like the weight of a room holding its breath. The corridor bends, and there, where in waking life there is only a blank wall, you find an archway. Beyond it, the threshold of the room with no door. Crossing into it is like stepping into a held note. The air does not move. The light seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a soft illumination without source. The walls are high, their surfaces smoothed by time into a pale sheen. The floor is bare stone but warm to the touch, as though it has been bathed in sunlight you cannot see. The room holds nothing, No furniture, no window, no mark to suggest its use. And yet it does not feel empty. There is a sense of presence, of something here that is older than the castle itself, something that has been waiting for you to arrive. Those who dream of it speak of a sound, so faint it is almost a texture in the air, like the hush of distant waves or the soft turning of a page in another room. It is not a sound that invites you forward or warns you back. It is simply there, like the heartbeat of the space itself. In dreams, you might stand in the center, sensing the even weight of the room around you. Some say they have walked the edges, running their fingertips along the stone, finding no seam, no flaw, nothing to suggest a hidden way in or out. The room exists entirely within itself, as if it were carved not from the castle but from the space between thoughts. The strange part is how familiar it feels. Even in the first moment of entering, there is the quiet certainty that you have been here before. Not in this lifetime, perhaps not in any life you can name, but somewhere in the deep pattern of memory. The recognition is without origin, a warmth in the chest, a sense of arrival. And then, as dreams do, the room begins to dissolve. The light dims or brightens, the sound fades, the air grows lighter. You may try to hold on to it, to memorize the grain of the stone or the way the air feels against your skin, but the edges blur. The next time you blink, you are somewhere else entirely. Another hall, another scene, the waking world creeping back in. No one has found the room outside of dreams. Some have tried, tracing the castle's dimensions, mapping its corridors, knocking on walls to listen for hollow spaces. All measurements confirm what the waking eye already knows. There is no such place. Yet the dreams continue, passed quietly from one dreamer to another, sometimes years apart, always with the same details, the same stillness. Perhaps it is not a room at all, but a shape the mind gives to something it cannot otherwise hold. A memory too old to name, a truth that exists only in the soft hours of sleep. Or perhaps the castle itself keeps this one space apart, hidden from waking life, revealed only when the body rests and the mind drifts into its own corridors. Whatever it is, those who have been there carry the sense of it long after the dream fades. They speak of a calm that lingers, of an image that returns in moments of stillness. High walls, smooth stone, a space without time. And sometimes, as they walk the real halls of the castle, they feel a shift in the air. Not enough to turn their head, but enough to know that the room with no door is still there, waiting for the next dream to find it. The corridor is long, its walls dimly lit by light that seems to come from nowhere in particular. Your steps are soft, but in the hush they sound louder than they should, each one followed by a pause that lets the quiet close in again. Ahead, the hall narrows, the air thickening in a way that feels almost tangible, as though you are walking into the heart of the castle itself. There is no destination in sight, no door, no staircase, no bend to promise change. Only the steady rhythm of walking, the faint echo of your presence stretching ahead and behind. The silence is not empty. It has depth, layers that seem to shift as you move, like ripples spreading outward in still water. With each step, the world you know drifts further away. The details of the day fade, faces, voices, the press of time replaced by the texture of stone beneath your fingers, the faint scent of air that has been trapped for centuries. The castle feels larger here, as if the walls have drawn back just beyond sight, leaving space for something vast and unseen. You begin to notice that your footsteps are not alone. They are answered faintly, as though from a great distance, a soft, delayed echo that does not quite match your pace. It is not enough to startle, only to make you listen more closely, counting the moments between your tread and the reply. The sound could be memory, or it could be something else moving just out of sight. The corridor's light grows dimmer, but your eyes adjust. Shadows gather in the seams between stones in the corners where the walls meet the floor. They are not threatening, only deep, as if they lead somewhere you cannot follow. You feel the air grow cooler, though not cold, and the rhythm of your steps slows without your deciding. Somewhere far ahead, the sound of the answering footsteps fades, leaving only your own. The silence becomes softer now, almost like the inside of a thought. You realize you're no longer walking toward anything. You are simply walking into the quiet itself, letting it surround you, letting it take the weight from your movements. The walls feel closer now, the light lower, the space narrowing. Each step seems to cover more ground than it should, as though the hall itself is shortening, drawing you deeper with each motion. Your breath is slow, matching the measured pace, until even that sound feels like part of the silence rather than a break in it. And then you notice there is no echo anymore. No return of your steps from the walls, no faint reply from ahead or behind. The sound of your movement is absorbed instantly, as though the stones themselves are listening and keeping what they hear. It is here, in this depth of stillness, that memory begins to dissolve. Names fade first, then places, then the shapes of moments you thought you would always hold. The silence does not take them away. It simply smooths them down, the way water wears a pebble until it is round. You are not losing them so much as placing them somewhere else, where they no longer press against you. The corridor ends without warning, not with a wall, not with a door, but with nothing at all. The floor continues into darkness, and the air feels vast, open. You stand at the edge, listening, and there is nothing to hear but the soft pulse of your own stillness. Here, there is no need to move further. The silence is complete, holding you as the castle might hold a breath. Somewhere behind you, the hall still stretches back through centuries, but ahead there is only this. A space beyond sound, beyond thought, where even the idea of footsteps fades into the dark. The last of the night settles over the castle like a blanket. The towers, once sharp against the fading sky, have melted into the darkness, their shapes suggested only by the faintest outlines against the stars. The wind that moved through the battlements earlier has grown softer now, more like a sigh than a voice. Inside, the corridors are still. The lanterns have burned low, their light thin and drowsy, spilling only far enough to touch the nearest stones. The air feels warmer here, as though the walls themselves are holding the memory of the day's light. The castle breathes. Not in any way you can measure, but in the way the spaces seem to expand and settle, as if the building shifts into a gentler rhythm once the last footsteps have faded. The stones no longer stand as sentinels, they rest. The doors no longer guard, they lean into their frames. Even the echoes have grown quiet, folding themselves away until morning. In the great hall, the fire is burned down to embers. They glow faintly in the dark, their slow pulses of light marking the passing of minutes that no one is counting. Shadows lie undisturbed on the floor, their edges softened, their weight easy. The rooms above and below share in this slumber. Dust drifts slowly in the still air, settling on tapestries and old beams. Windows hold the cool of the night outside, their glass dark, reflecting nothing. Somewhere deep within the walls, you can almost hear the faint creak of timber easing into rest. This is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of keeping, of holding all that has passed within these walls and letting it settle into the deepest layers of stone. The castle sleeps, but it does not forget. If you close your eyes now, you might feel that sleep reaching you as well, a slow drift, a letting go. The night folds around you, warm where it needs to be, cool where it soothes, until the sense of yourself as separate from the place begins to dissolve. You are simply here, part of the stillness, part of the long breath the castle takes until dawn. And in that breath, the stories rest too. The footsteps, the lanterns, the unseen rooms, the voices in the corridors, all are quiet now, not gone, only waiting. Somewhere deep in the dream of the castle, they turn over and the stone holds them close. The castle sleeps, and with it so do you.